Funding for the Windsors, a royal family, has been provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the annual financial support of viewers like you.
Like Windsor Castle, the family which took its name seemed ancient, imperishable. This is the last great dynasty in Europe. Its rituals date back 1,000 years to the Saxon kings. There is an element of magic that binds the British to their monarchy. And a strong element of calculation.
One of the ways in which the British monarchy has survived has been its capacity to reinvent itself from one generation to another, and has been the capacity of the British people to see in the monarchy itself as an institution different things at different times which have resonated with their ordinary lives and hopes and expectations.
The royal family provides the British with a soap opera of sovereigns.
One of the functions of the royal family in the minds of people is to be the continuing story of Peyton Place. Birth, death, marriages. And of course, in that story, there is always somebody who's not actually behaving as they should be, or the Dark Princess, if you like. The story goes on.
It is a story of powerful women and of men forced to wait a lifetime for the throne. It is the story of a charming prince who would disappoint a nation.
He was the most famous man in the world. He was the blue-eyed boy of the whole world. Everybody wanted to touch him. I mean, you know, he looked divine, and he had this terrific charm and a smile and the easy manner.
A charming prince who became king and was himself disappointed.
It was very a painful moment, and I had to say, I'm afraid, sir, she is not going to have the privilege of being Royal Highness. And perhaps I shouldn't say it, it's too intimate. His Royal Highness burst into tears on my shoulder.
My first word.
It is the story of a king painfully shy, who became a symbol of World War II patriotism. A story of dedication and service.
There is a motto which has been borne by many of my ancestors, a noble motto, I serve. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
A story of a new generation of royals.
She hadn't had love affairs, and she was very beautiful, and she came from a very good home. And I did say to my son-in-law, her father, I did say, it's the first time the Queen of England's ever been chosen by a referendum, because he really was.
A new generation that promised to be less stuffy and more with it.
All these men around here.
Love you!
I'll see you later.
I thought she was a splendid girl, but I think basically unsuited to the task of being a royal princess.
Fairy tales, even when they go wrong, are a wonderful copy.
Oh, God. Sometimes I need you several times a week.
So do I. I need you all the week, all the time.
To all, to each, a happy Christmas. God bless you.
It is the story of the royal family's clever use of the media.
Perhaps never before has a newsreel camera captured such charming informal close-ups of almost every member of our royal family.
The first film about the royal family was one of the most skillfully executed propaganda exercises which I certainly can remember. It was a masterstroke, a superb piece of public relations. I suspect a lot of other people too have progressively wondered if the royal family are prepared to make a film taking you into their house, taking you to their picnics, then why shouldn't the paparazzi sneak around in rhododendrons taking pictures of royal princesses bathing?
I think it is the Queen that one's so desperately sorry for. It's difficult for her to understand somebody who doesn't have a sense of duty. Everybody thinks in a way, what fun to be the Queen if you can be the Queen for a day. But for a lifetime, to have that life.
Seeing what she looked upon as her own home go up in flames was devastating. And it came in a year when she'd had quite enough blows to withstand.
The Windsors is the story of a royal family. In May 1935, Britain's King George V celebrated 25 years on the throne, his silver jubilee.
How can I express what is in my heart? As I passed this morning through cheering multitude to and from St. Paul's Cathedral, as I thought there of all that these 25 years have brought to me and to my country and my empire, how could I fail to be most deeply moved?
I will remember it all my life because it was such an exciting day. He was the governor and you all had to look up to him, and I was proud to be British and look up to a man like him because I thought he was a very good man.
They look this way with a little wave and that way with a little wave. You get something in your inside when you see them. You think to yourself, oh, and I don't know, it's a funny feeling you get that you want to cry or something like that.
Royalty was somebody very much aloof from us in those days. There was no intimate talk about them like there is today, which is a terrible mistake. And they were therefore was something very precious that you thought of with great awe.
George V's Silver Jubilee was more than an anniversary. It was a celebration of the survival of the monarchy. He had led Britain through crises like the First World War, which had destroyed many of Europe's monarchies.
I can only say to you, my very dear people, that the Queen and I thank you from the depth of our hearts for all the loyalty and, may I say, the love with which this day and always you have surrounded us.
I suppose that as King and Queen, they had a knack of getting things right, setting standards of public behavior, of visible behavior, of, as I say, getting things right. It's a very, very important knack, and I don't think it's mostly due to luck.
George V had become a symbol of everything British. He was the father of the House of Windsor. To his granddaughters Elizabeth and Margaret, he was Grandpapa England. George V was the son of Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. His grandmother was Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria's children and grandchildren married into most of the royal families of Europe. One of George V's cousins was the Tsar of Russia. Another was the Kaiser of Germany. These foreign links were to haunt him throughout his life. George was not brought up to be king. His elder brother Eddie was.
Queen Victoria once described them as wild as hawks. I can't manage them at all. And they were very undisciplined as little boys. They had a tutor, and he taught them how to shoot with bow and arrow. And he would run through the woods at Sandringham, pretending to be a deer, and they would be allowed to shoot at him.
When George was only 12, he was sent away to join the Navy with his brother Prince Eddie. Life aboard ship was rigorous and Spartan, and taught them discipline. George did poorly in his studies, but Eddie was hopeless. And Eddie was heir to the throne.
Prince Eddie was a few years older, but far stupider. There was a sort of lethargy about him. He didn't always connect, and also his private life had certain shadows over it.
Eddie's life had been dogged by sexual scandal. He died suddenly from pneumonia when George was 26. To the private relief of the family, George became heir to the throne. He also inherited Eddie's fiancée, the penniless German Princess Mary of Teck. They were married within months.
People have said that that was just a marriage of convenience, but it really wasn't. And I think probably there had been something going on perhaps slightly beforehand. But although they were very shy and inhibited and people thought they were a cold little couple, they wrote each other the most touching love letters, saying, oh, I'm so sorry that I'm so stiff when I'm with you, but really, I do love you, although I can't actually tell you so, I have to write it. And they understood each other perfectly.
In early newsreels, George was seen by his future subjects as leading a blameless and active life.
King George V was a sailor king who had spent his life in the Navy and was not an intellectual. Someone wrote about him, Prince of sportsmen, peerless shot, but happiest aboard his yacht. He really had great talent for doing the ordinary thing. He represented that always that it was good in the British character, like prudence, loyalty, discipline.
George's homely virtues would be severely tested. In 1910, he succeeded his father as the King of Great Britain and Ireland and Emperor of India. In the winter of 1911, King George and Queen Mary travelled to India to take part in the greatest imperial pageant ever staged, the Delhi Durbar. The massed millions of India bowed to George V, the King Emperor, ruler of the dominions beyond the seas and symbol of an empire on which the sun never set.
There was this little king sitting on his throne with officials all round, and even the fact he was just rather a little man made it all the more impressive. You felt that here was this little man, small as he was, king of it all.
Although it looked like an age-old tradition, the Durbar was invented to promote loyalty and specially staged for newsreel cameras.
Stage management and the stage managing of royalty was an essential aspect of life right the way across Europe. The great monarchies of that time were all of them inventing spectacular ceremonies connected with their monarchy. It's partly, I think, the need for emotion, excitement, hype, as I suppose we would now call it, bread and circuses, as the Romans had called it back in the time of their empire. In 1913, George's cousin, the Kaiser, laid on a spectacular wedding for his daughter in Berlin. All the European monarchs were invited. It was to be the last time they would meet. As a mark of respect, King George wore a German uniform, complete with spiked helmet. But the displays of friendship concealed long-standing national rivalries. The following year, Britain and Germany were at war. George V's cousin, the Kaiser, was transformed into a figure of hatred. As the king toured the front line to boost morale, anti-German feeling was growing in Britain. Rallies were held to denounce Germans. Anyone with a German name or German connection was suspect. Many were deported or driven from their homes. There were witch hunts and spy scares.
They insulted German governesses. They wouldn't listen to German music. They'd even kick Dachshunds in the street. They saw spies under every bed. And the press played this hysteria up and made it worse. They attacked my father because of our German name.
His father was Britain's top admiral, Prince Louis of Battenberg. He had married a granddaughter of Queen Victoria and had served in the British Navy for 47 years, but he was hounded out of office because of his German name and his German blood. King George was worried. Prince Louis was his cousin. His grandmother, Queen Victoria, was from the German House of Hanover. She had married Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, another German. The crisis came in 1917, when it looked as though Germany might win the war. People began to mutter that George and his family were really Germans, presiding over what the novelist H.G. Wells called an alien and uninspiring court.
When the king read this, he angrily retorted, "I may be uninspiring, but I'm damned if I'm an alien."
The king and queen were advised to tour industrial areas to quell discontent. Letters sent to the Prime Minister accused the King of disloyalty. When told of them, observers said he started and grew pale.
George V clearly got very worried that people in Britain thought that the monarchy, as embodied by him, was too Germanic, too European, not sufficiently closely associated with Britain itself. In fact, of course, both George V and his wife, Queen Mary, were almost wholly German, and they were very anxious when there was so much anxiety about Germany in the First World War, to recreate and reinvent the British monarchy as being the British monarchy, not a German monarch who happened to be resident in England.
And the easiest way to do this, of course, would be to change their name. So it was then decided to change the name, but nobody quite knew what the name was.
I don't think it was a significant question. They knew who they were. They knew everybody else knew who they were. And they knew vaguely they belonged to a certain family or a certain institution. But I didn't think in terms of surnames.
No one quite knew what the name was. Probably it was Saxe-Coburg-Gotha.
It could have been Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which was Prince Albert's family name, or it could have been Guelph, which was one of the Hanoverian names, or it could have been Wettin, and then there was an even worse one called Whipper.
George V's family name was most likely Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, all the more embarrassing when German Gotha bombers began to raid London. The King's private secretary, Lord Stamfordham, suggested a new name for the dynasty. The name of a castle that had symbolized the monarchy for more than 800 years. Its stone walls as solid and as English as the earth on which it stood. It recalled prancing horses and plumes on cocked hats, and the standard snapping over the round tower. The name struck the right patriotic note, Windsor. In July 1917, a proclamation was issued declaring that the royal family was to be known as the House of Windsor.
And it was on that occasion that the Kaiser, on hearing of this, made quite a good joke. He said in future he would look forward to going to the play The Merry Wives of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha.
On the King's orders, Prince Louis of Battenberg's family had to change their name. They translated it to Mountbatten. The King's most embarrassing relations, like the Duke of Coburg, who was fighting on the German side, were cut off completely. The King also decided to reject his Russian cousin, the Tsar, with far more terrible consequences. Russia had fought the war on Britain's side, and the two royal families were very close. Forced to abdicate in 1917 after the February Revolution, the Tsar and his family feared for their lives. They naturally turned to Britain for refuge. The King and government agreed to offer them asylum, but the King's private secretary had other ideas.
Lord Stamfordham came to the King and said, "It is going to make you very unpopular in England if you give sanctuary to a deposed tyrant, as he was thought, such as the Tsar. All the people who are at present clamouring for a republic in England will use this against you." The King got cold feet, and he instructed Stamfordham to reverse the decision on giving asylum to the Tsar, to tell the Russian government that there were various difficulties, and so we could not accept him.
The Tsar and his family were imprisoned for 16 months and then slaughtered. The murders haunted their British relations.
They were all shot together. I believe my cousin Alexei, who was just 14 years old, didn't die at once. He was shot 3 more times. And the following day, my Aunt Elizabeth, who had founded the nursing sister movement and was revered almost as a saint, was also murdered by being flung down a mine shaft.
George V's decision to abandon his cousin and the rest of the Russian royal family was covered up for decades.
If the Tsar had come to England, of course, the terrible massacre of the following year would not have taken place. And what one must say of the king is that he denied the only possible chance of escape to the Tsar. And so the blood of the Tsar, in a sense, rests on the hands of King George V.
He didn't think he was passing a death sentence. He would have felt if he'd had them here, he might have been passing a death sentence on the British monarchy as well as the Russian monarchy. And what good would that have done to the world? So we mustn't give him second sight. He didn't know what was going to happen.
Victory in war did not prevent renewed unrest at home. There were strikes and calls for Russian-style revolution. Troops were called out to keep order. In Ireland, nationalists were repressed by force, but their republicanism seemed to threaten both the crown and the empire. George V used crown and pageantry to strengthen the empire. On St. George's Day 1924, he opened the British Empire exhibition in London.
I declare the British Empire exhibition open.
Crowds flocked to Wembley. The stadium had been transformed into a magnificent theme park with replicas of buildings and settings from different parts of the empire. The king and queen mingled with their subjects. The aim, to promote trade and understanding throughout their realms and territories beyond the seas.
George V was a passionate empire monarch. He believed that it was his destiny to rule over this vast stretch of territory spread around the whole world, which to him meant not merely power, but also almost a kind of mystical glory.
The exhibition was a huge success and a diversion for the British people at a time of economic trouble. In promoting the empire, the king and queen could improve the domestic image of the House of Windsor in the newsreels.
One of the things that George V was very good at was in projecting a curious hybrid image of the British royal family. That is, that on one side it was very splendid and spectacular and ceremonially grand, but on the other side he presented an image with Queen Mary and his children of middle-class, bourgeois, domestic virtue and decency. Now, what is odd about that is that it was, in a sense, a complete fiction, in as much as the fact that the private image of the royal family under George V really didn't square with the public image at all.
George V had no desire to live like a king. He hated royal palaces. He liked Sandringham because he had been brought up there. but he preferred not to live in the big house. Instead, he chose to live in a little house in the grounds, York Cottage, which reminded him of his childhood.
It was a very poky little place, I think. My mother thought it was a wretched place. I have a feeling that Queen Mary may have too, but I think the King thought it was the cat's whiskers. It was a wonderful house because he'd partly been brought up there.
The King's eldest son said, "You'll never understand my father until you have seen York Cottage." The King spent his time there sticking stamps into his collection and shooting on the Sandringham estate. Queen Mary was frustrated by the King's resistance to change, as her niece remembers.
Whenever she tried to do anything, George V always said, but I've always had it like this. My mother always did like that. You mustn't touch it, you see.
The King kept her in a very tight rein indeed. I mean, he didn't like to go outside his absolutely rigid routine. He didn't like dining out. He didn't like going to stay in country houses. He didn't like going to the theatre, if he could possibly avoid it. And, of course, she did like that sort of thing. But, of course, in exchange for that, she had a position of immense dignity, of immense wealth, I think one must say, and privilege, and she knew it and she paid the price for it.
Queen Mary's artistic talents found an unusual outlet.
She liked collecting antiques from people who were not always very willing to let her have them. And there were some pretty awful stories about how she would go to your house, admire something, and make it quite clear that she would wish to be given it, and she would stay there till she got it. Awful case, I know, of Lady Hudson, who had some chairs painted by Angelica Kaufmann. And Queen Mary came to tea, admired these chairs, and said that she had a table painted by Angelica Kaufmann. The chairs would go very well with it. And Lady Hudson did her best. But at 9 p.m., Lady Hudson gave up, and the chairs went off in the Royal Daimler.
In the winter of 1925, the other great influence in the King's life, his mother, Queen Alexandra, died. Her son's wreath carried a simple message: "To darling mother dear from your devoted children, George and Mary." The King had adored his mother.
He would ring up and say, "Mother dear, you must not go to church, you've got a bad cold." And if she did go to church, he would be there too and find the places in her prayer book like she would have done for him for a little boy. The trouble was, she never realized that her children grew up. And when he was in his 20s and in command of a ship, he got a letter from her which ended up with a great big kiss for your lovely little face, darling Georgie.
By contrast, George had been intimidated by his father, and that was to poison his relationship with his own children. "I was terrified of my father," he told a friend, "and I am determined that my own children will be terrified of me."
The public image was of a very happy family, a devoted father, devoted mother. But the reality was that the family was really quite unhappy. But nobody knew about it, or at least the great British public didn't know about it. The people in the know knew, but they didn't tell.
King George and Queen Mary had a daughter and 5 sons. The youngest, Prince John, was born epileptic and brain damaged, and kept hidden away until he died at 14. King George based his idea of family life on his own upbringing in the Navy.
I was rather alarmed by him as a child, because I think he shouted to everybody rather like he commanding on a battleship.
Well, he was gruff. He had a gruff voice, he had a gruff manner. It wasn't a disagreeable manner, but it was gruff. I think he expected that if he barked, the barked would be heeded, as it were. He had a bristling beard, so that as a grandchild, your ritual kiss wasn't a wholly agreeable affair.
I remember one case which shows how, without intending to be at all, King George V could be insensitive and indeed almost cruel. It was after the birth of Prince Henry, and the young Prince Edward was very curious and wanted to know how it happened and how did babies come. And the king, with the best possible intentions, produced a story about how the baby had flown in through the window. And so Prince Edward said, but where are its wings? Oh, they always get chopped off, said the king rather gleefully. And this horrific image of the baby having its wings chopped off haunted poor Prince Edward for months and weeks thereafter.
Queen Mary never intervened. She said, I always have to remember that my husband is also my sovereign.
When she saw the king trampling insensitively over her children, bullying and forcing them to do things they didn't want to do, her heart bled, but she never actually turned round to her husband and said, look, you simply can't do this, you must treat the children differently.
Queen Mary was very buttoned up and very unbending. And she didn't find it easy, I think, to discuss vital things, crucial things, to show warmth, as it were, to people.
She just was incapable of what Princess Diana calls hugging. She would never hug anybody spontaneously. Didn't mean she didn't love them, but she didn't know how to express it in a natural way.
The effect of George V's martinet treatment of them and their mother's inhibited treatment of them gave them all certain neuroses. The Prince of Wales was practically anorexic when he was a child. He wouldn't eat, he was obsessive about exercising. He had these nervous tics, he was always fiddling with his cuffs or fiddling with his tie. The poor Prince Albert, the second son, developed a tremendous stammer when he was about 7 years old, which was the central nightmare of his life.
Naturally left-handed, Bertie was forced by his father to write with his right hand. The king also insisted that he wore splints to correct his knock-knees.
Prince Henry, that's the third son, didn't seem to be too badly affected. I don't think he was a man with great nerve endings, really. Prince George, the youngest, became very wild when he was a young man. He went into some pretty dashing nightlife and sex life, and at one point he was addicted to drugs. All of them, I think, drank too much when they were young men, mostly in reaction to the very strict life that they led at home.
It seems almost incredible that the royal princes could have got away with what they did get away with without being exposed to the full glare of publicity. Today, all their imperfections, their derelictions, their drunkenness, drugging, whatever it might be, would be gleefully exploited in the media and thrust down our throats every morning at breakfast.
The media did show the successes of the Prince of Wales. After the war, Lloyd George, the Prime Minister, had suggested a new role for the glamorous prince. He should tour the empire to strengthen links to the crown.
That was a very good idea. First of all, it gave the Prince of Wales something to do, but also it was something that the king couldn't have done half as well as the Prince of Wales did it. And it set up a great double act, really, between this quite ordinary, decent, but thoroughly kingly man who stayed at home doing his thing and doing it well, and a young Prince of Wales who seemed very much a man of his generation, and also had the extraordinary and very unusual thing, star quality. The king didn't have star quality. He was kingly, but he wasn't a star. The Prince of Wales was a star. He was wonderful at talking to people in a relaxed way and making them feel $1 million. He could make speeches off the cuff, just at whistle stops, and people would go away with a song in their hearts.
The prince was the first royal superstar, but the glamorous public image was at odds with the grim private reality. The prince was depressed and on the edge of a nervous breakdown. He was lonely and plagued with self-doubt, as a letter to his private secretary Godfrey Thomas reveals.
This was a frantic cry for help, written on Christmas Day, almost suicidal, and needless to say, it worried my father absolutely stiff. A sort of hopelessly lost feeling has come over me, and I think I'm going kind of mad. I feel faint at the thought of next year's trip. Christ, how I loathe my job now, and all this press-puffed empty success. I feel I'm through with it, and long to die. I tell you as my greatest friend and the one man I can trust and who really understands me. I do feel such a bloody little shit.
The famous double act between the King and the Prince of Wales was publicly successful, but privately riddled with tension. The prince felt his father didn't appreciate his efforts. The public applauded, but his father could only criticize.
Things which King George V said to his courtiers show that he genuinely thought that the Prince of Wales had made a marvellous job of, for instance, his trip to Australia, in which he'd been mobbed with the most hysterical scenes. But all he said to the Prince of Wales was, I noticed that you were wearing the wrong spurs with the wrong set of boots, or that you really ought not to be seen smoking in public, or it was all the silly little criticisms.
The king was dismayed by his son's headstrong ways and restless desire for change. The deepest differences were over the prince's love affairs with a series of married women, like Frida Dudley Ward, which stopped him making a suitable marriage. Most of the prince's circle were getting married, but he only appeared at weddings as best man. When his friend Louis Mountbatten married, Mountbatten was still suffering from his father's recent death.
The prince came in to comfort him and said, but I envy you being able to weep for your father. If my father died, I'd be glad.
In 1928, the king fell seriously ill. The whole nation followed the daily bulletins on his declining health. The Prince of Wales, on tour in Kenya, was urgently recalled by a telegram from the Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin.
When Lascelles, his private secretary, showed him this telegram, he said, oh, silly old Baldwin, just an electoral dodge, I'm not going. So Lascelles got furious and he said, "Sir, the King of England is dying, and if that doesn't matter to you, it certainly matters to us." And the Prince of Wales simply shrugged his shoulders and gave him a look and went out and went on with his plans for seducing the wife of a local colonial official, and was very happy to tell Lascelles that he'd done so the next morning.
Lascelles resigned. The rest of the prince's staff finally persuaded him to return home. But they were full of foreboding that he was unfit for the throne he would inherit if his father died. The nation's prayers were answered. The king's life was spared. He made a slow and painful recovery at Bognor, by the sea, with his granddaughter, Princess Elizabeth. Before the king left, seeking to immortalize the royal link with their town, the Bognor Town Council paid a visit to his private secretary, Lord Stamfordham.
He went along to the king's study and he said, "The town council is here and they want to call Bognor Regis." And the king, who was rather fussed, preparing to go back to Windsor, said, "Oh, bugger Bognor." And Lord Stamfordham bowed, returned to the delegation and said, "His Majesty has been graciously pleased to accede to your request."
The king returned to duty, greatly strengthened in the nation's affections. Despite his limited horizons, George had built up a reputation as a solid constitutional monarch, dispensing common sense advice.
George V's notion of what the monarch was for in terms of politics was that he envisaged it as a sort of referee, that he was presiding over different football teams of political parties, as you might say, and that on the whole he saw his job as being to bring warring political parties together when there were periods of national crisis.
The national crisis came with the Great Economic Depression of 1931. As trade slumped and unemployment rocketed, the Labour government split. The king hated socialism, but found nothing to fear in the Labour governments of Ramsay MacDonald. When MacDonald wanted to resign over the crisis, the king asked him to stay on and lead a national coalition. The royal persuasion worked, leaving MacDonald in a Conservative alliance which his own Labour Party disowned.
The king took a very decisive step in that crisis, which was, I think, a disastrous step, although it was perfectly constitutional. Nobody could say it wasn't constitutional. He advised the Prime Minister of the day, Ramsay MacDonald, as he was perfectly entitled to do, to form a national government. He begged him to do so. And Ramsay MacDonald, very misguidedly, agreed to do it and formed a national government. As a result, the country was deprived of an effective opposition for a decade during which it was particularly necessary that the country should have an opposition.
Opposition was forced onto the streets when the National Coalition won a landslide election victory. To the unemployed, it looked as though the king had created a royal government, while the depression went on. The king pleaded for unity through the new medium of wireless.
Through one of the marvels of modern science, I am enabled this Christmas Day to speak to all my peoples throughout the empire.
I shall always remember as a small boy listening to George V's Christmas broadcasts. His voice was extraordinary because it had a slightly sort of whiskey sort of timbre to it, as you know, it had a gamey timbre to it. It was august, but it was also intimate. He hated doing it, but he was a broadcasting natural.
The King's first Christmas broadcast in 1932 instantly created a new royal tradition.
And to those who are celebrating this day with their children and their grandchildren, to all, to each, I wish a happy Christmas. God bless you.
He wasn't a very clever man, but his heart beat with England. There's no question about that. He knew exactly the heartbeat of England, and England knew his heartbeat. No question about it. He was a very great old king, in many respects.
At his Silver Jubilee in 1935, the King was surprised by the degree of public adulation. What the public did not know was that for their beloved King and Queen, there was a shadow over the Jubilee celebrations. The Prince of Wales insisted on flaunting his latest love, the twice-married American Wallis Simpson, at the Jubilee Ball.
Mrs. Simpson was there. The King and Queen didn't know that she was invited. And I remember I was at that ball, and I remember there was a sort of frisson. And one didn't know quite what it was. But what had happened was that Queen Mary said, "Who is this woman?" And the Prince of Wales had left in a temper with her, with Mrs. Simpson.
The King's thoughts turned towards his second son, Bertie. His Scottish wife, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, was a great support to him and very popular. They perpetuated the Windsor image of the happy family, and their daughter Elizabeth guaranteed the future of the dynasty. But Bertie was not the heir to the old king's throne.
If by a wave of the wand he had been able to remove the Prince of Wales from the scene, to in some way reverse the order, so that his second son, the Duke of York, instead became heir to the throne, I have no doubt at all that he would have done so.
By the end of his Jubilee year, the old king was sinking. His doctor and friend, Lord Dawson, wanted to save the family from stress. The Queen begged him not to prolong the king's suffering. He wrote out on the back of a menu card a bulletin for the BBC.
This is London. Following bulletin was issued at 9:25. The King's life is moving peacefully towards its close.
We now know that that is not true. That within 2 hours of writing that famous bulletin, Lord Dawson of Penn went to the King's bedroom, picked up 2 syringes. One he loaded with a lethal dose of cocaine, the other with a lethal dose of morphine. And he said to the nurse, "Inject these into the King's jugular vein." The nurse refused, and so Lord Dawson did the job himself. And within an hour or so, the King was dead.
Millions listened until after midnight, when the nation heard that the King was dead.
Lord Dawson thought the King ought to die before midnight, so that the news of his death could be announced in the Times newspaper the next morning, and not in what he called lesser organs of the afternoon.
The Times got its scoop, but the real story of this act of royal euthanasia went unreported for 50 years. Genuine grief for the king convulsed the nation. Those in the know were worried about the Prince of Wales, now proclaimed king.
Whereas it hath pleased Almighty God,
The new king, Edward VIII, broke with tradition to watch the ceremony. Beside him was the woman his father found so unsuitable, and whom he now intended to make his queen.
God save the king.
The coming year would confirm the old king's worst fears. It would split the royal family and pit brother against brother.
He was the most famous man in the world. He was the blue-eyed boy of the whole world. Everybody wanted to touch him. I mean, you know, he looked divine, and he had this terrific charm and smile and the easy manner.
At 41, the Prince of Wales became King Edward VIII, following the death of his father, George V, on January the 20th, 1936.
Edward, Albert,
The public's confidence in their new king was not shared by the royal family. They knew he was covertly watching his own proclamation with a twice-married American woman.
God save the king.
But only the king knew that he planned to make this woman queen and empress of a quarter of the world's population. The new king followed his father's coffin. Uneasily, some said.
He seemed uncertain as to his balance and his sense of direction. And he was quite alone. It was a figure of great pathos, I thought. I couldn't possibly have known at the time what was going to befall him, but he certainly, on that day, looked a sad and stricken character.
The Windsor dynasty had adapted to survive. But King Edward wanted to modernize the monarchy and break with everything his father had represented. Years later, he admitted to their conflict.
My father resisted change, and even to the day he died, he still looked back to the pre-World War I days and used to say those were the good times, the good old times. We were brought up very strictly. My father was a great disciplinarian, and sometimes when my father admonished me for something that I'd done, said, "My dear boy, you must always remember who you are." So I used to think, well, now who am I?
I think the people around the king were always looking for what you might call the key to make him into the perfect person that they hoped he'd be. But it was somehow or other, there was something missing, somehow or other, they couldn't find it.
One man who'd observed Edward closely was the Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin. He thought him an abnormal being, half child, half genius, as though 2 or 3 cells in his brain had remained entirely undeveloped while the rest of him was a mature man. And Baldwin disapproved of Edward's restless sex life.
There are endless stories illustrating how, at the end of an evening when he should have been still dancing with the Governor-General's lady, he in fact had vanished with a nubile typist and appeared looking rather sheepish at breakfast next day.
But craving stability, he had serious affairs with married women. One of them was Lady Thelma Furness, a glamorous American.
The Prince of Wales was very much in love with Thelma Furness. And then I was walking down Park Lane, and I met Thelma, and she said, "Oh, Barbara, I was just going to ring you up to tell you I'm off to America." And so I said, "Oh, what about the little man? Who's going to look after him?" And she always called him the little man. And she said, "Oh, I've told Wallace Simpson to look after him." And so I said, "Oh, I expect to be all right." And she went off. And then the girl who was with me said, "You know, Wallace Simpson's not very, very pretty, but she's got a great charm. I wouldn't be happy to leave my man in charm." And I said, "Oh, don't be so silly. Of course she's all right."
But Wallace Simpson wasn't all right. She stole the prince, body and soul. Wallace Simpson was born Wallace Warfield, the daughter of an old Baltimore family fallen on hard times. At 21, she married a naval officer, Win Spencer, but Spencer became a drunken bully. She divorced and married a social climbing businessman, Ernest Simpson. At first, he was flattered by the prince's infatuation with his wife. But when Edward became king, 3 years into the affair, Simpson suspected that he would lose his wife. She was a determined woman.
A clever, witty, quick, tough woman. But she had charm and knew how to use it. And of course she certainly charmed the Prince of Wales and charmed many others. She was American, no harm in that. But I say no harm in that deliberately because, of course, at the time, in the 30s, the Americans were still looked on as rather brash, nouveau riche newcomers. I met Mrs. Simpson once at a very small lunch party. She was extremely elegantly dressed, but one of the hardest faces I've ever seen, the mouth like a slit.
Mrs. Simpson was after what she loved. She loved great wealth. Well, he had it. She loved making what she called a success of life. Being top historical news.
As a well-born American, Mrs. Simpson was not deferential towards royalty. She wished to meet Edward's family at the palace, where divorced women never went.
He wanted to bring Mrs. Simpson to meet Queen Mary because he said that if my mother met Mrs. Simpson, she would understand. Well, the very thought is really extraordinary. That the thought of Mrs. Simpson, she then was meeting Queen Mary and Queen Mary understanding, unusual thinking.
Queen Mary had promised her late husband she would never receive Mrs. Simpson, but Edward ignored his family's disapproval.
He was absolutely possessed. I've never seen a human being so utterly and completely possessed by another as he was by her.
He expressed his love for Mrs. Simpson by indulging her passion for jewels. He lavished many gifts on her, helping to design exotic new settings for the gems. On the back, he wrote childish endearments and private jokes. While cutting his servants' pay, the king settled on Mrs. Simpson nearly a third of his entire fortune. Mrs. Simpson's fleeting appearances with the king did not reveal her growing role in his life. She secretly accompanied him on skiing holidays, to sporting events and dinner parties, and played hostess at his country retreat. Edward was bored by the rituals of kingship, like the presentation of debutantes at court. His loneliness as a bachelor was rubbed in by the constant presence of the Duke of York, his dutiful and happily married younger brother, a reminder of the king's own shortcomings. Although unaware of the royal romance, the public recognized that Edward was a new kind of king, casual and unconventional, determined to bring change. He preferred his left profile to his right, and insisted that this must appear on postage stamps, flouting the tradition that he should face the opposite way to his father. He was the first monarch to take to the air, and he started the King's Flight, a fleet of royal aircraft. Besides taking him everywhere, they smuggled in designer dresses from Paris for Wallace Simpson, and lobsters and champagne. The King's behavior shocked the courtiers, his palace aides. But in public, he could do the traditional things, and do them well.
Only a few of us on parade this morning have known the awful weight of war. I hope, and indeed I pray, that never again may our age and a generation be called upon to face such stern and terrible days.
As the king rode back from Hyde Park to the palace, a madman suddenly burst out of the crowd and hurled what looked like a bomb at the king.
For a moment, he really believed he was going to be killed, and did behave with extreme dignity, calm. He rode quite gently on, paying no real attention, no panic at all. It was very creditable.
It was his finest moment, but his disillusioned courtiers thought that he needed more than courage to be a good king.
The courtiers, particularly his private secretary, had lost all confidence in him. If the king had perished in glory on that ride, I think that among the courtiers there would have been a certain amount of carefully concealed relief and a certain amount of feeling it, for thank goodness we're going to be in safer hands from now on.
But Edward presented a bigger threat to the old order. He approved of the way fascists in Europe handled social problems like poverty and unemployment. Prime Minister Baldwin resented the king's attempts to meddle in social and foreign policy. Edward revived his family connections with Germany. Only this time, it was Nazi Germany, which the king and Mrs. Simpson seemed to admire.
They They admired the authoritarian style, they shared the scepticism of parliamentary democracy, and they saw in Germany, as they imagined, a modernising, progressive nation under firm and decisive leadership, which were all the things that you couldn't say about the England of Stanley Baldwin.
He did believe that Britain and Germany should try and resume their friendship, but didn't realize quite how dangerous Hitler was and how unwise it was to have anything to do with him.
Acting on reports that the new king was highly pro-German, Hitler sent Edward's cousin, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg, to England. His first tactless appearance was in Nazi uniform at George V's funeral.
His cousin, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg, who was an exceptionally stupid old Etonian, convinced himself that Edward VIII was set to become more of a dictator than any constitutional monarch had tried to be since the days of King George II.
The Duke of Saxe-Coburg met the king privately and sent this report back to Hitler. To my question whether discussion between Baldwin and Hitler would be desirable for future German-British relations, the king replied, "Who is king here, Baldwin or I? I myself wish to talk to Hitler and will do so, here or in Germany." The king's stand created a dilemma for Stanley Baldwin, as he told his family.
What made Baldwin worried about Edward's affiliations with Germany? It was that fear of not being to know exactly what Edward was going to do next that was a factor in his mind. But of course all this couldn't be said. It had to be done behind the scenes. Good government flourishes in the dark. He kept all these fears about Edward to himself.
Baldwin's fears were further aroused by the king's behavior when Hitler marched his troops into the former German Rhineland. Hitler gambled that he would not be opposed.
According to secret German documents at that time, the king actually sent a message to his government that there was to be no question of contemplating any war or any threat of war over the Rhineland, which again is a major piece of interference in foreign policy and really not the act of a constitutional monarch.
Hitler sent a favoured new ambassador to London, Joachim von Ribbentrop. His mission? To keep Britain neutral. He would infiltrate the social circle in which the King and Wallace Simpson moved. Ministers like Walter Runciman became convinced that Mrs. Simpson was a security risk.
My father was then in the cabinet, and the government was very much worried on the security risk because Mrs. Simpson was so well in with the German embassy. And I remember my father telling me that one day there'd been a cabinet meeting in the morning, and in the evening he had to go to a reception where, rather to his annoyance because he disliked him, Ribbentrop came up and started discussing him what the cabinet had been talking about that morning. Baldwin having reported it to the king, who reported it to Mrs. Simpson, who had been round to the German embassy.
He was thoroughly careless in his attitude to documents and left them around, and there was even a suspicion that unauthorized people might be seeing them. So that was something which caused genuine anxiety.
The king was equally reckless in his private life. He appeared at the races with Mrs. Simpson, still a married woman. In August, he chartered a yacht, the Narlin, and with Wallace Simpson on board, cruised the Mediterranean. Never had a British monarch been seen looking so casual and so frivolous as he sauntered through Greek and Turkish ports.
He always believed it was possible to go kinging, as he described it, and then to switch off and go home and nobody would pay any attention to what he did, and he could conduct his private life exactly as he wanted. And this was an illusion which remained with him.
Tommy Lascelles, once again private secretary, joined in the fun despite his disapproval. He gave diarist Harold Nicholson an insider's glimpse of the cruise.
Tommy, in fact, doesn't speak too badly of Mrs. Simpson. He rather liked her. He said that they were like two children together. When the yachting trip was over, the King said, "Now, Tommy, back to striped trousers and coats again, back to school." He thinks he really loathed being king and was determined to get out of it as soon as he could.
On his return, the King conducted some official business in Scotland with his brother Bertie, the Duke of York. He had promised to open a hospital in Aberdeen, but sent the Duke in his place. The King met Wallace Simpson at the Aberdeen station and whisked her off to Balmoral Castle. While a British news blackout kept the royal romance secret at home, it made headlines throughout the world. The American journalist H.L. Mencken called it the biggest news story since the resurrection. Papers imported to Britain even had bits snipped out of them.
We were all very ill-served by the press. When the whole world knew about this affair, we were kept in the dark about it. And it really should have come to a head before the old king died.
In October, Mrs. Simpson filed for divorce. Americans read about it, the British did not. The divorce would be final in 6 months. This left the king 2 weeks to marry before his coronation, now set for May the 12th, 1937. For Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, the king's affair was now more than a scandal. It was a constitutional crisis. The king, as head of the Church of England, could not marry a divorcee. Baldwin drove to warn the king that the survival of the monarchy was at stake. The king said that he would marry Mrs. Simpson come what may, and if this were really unacceptable, he would abdicate. Baldwin told a colleague, "I have heard such things from my king tonight as I never thought to hear." That night, the king asked his mother to receive his intended wife. Calling Mrs. Simpson an adventuress, Queen Mary refused. The next day, November the 17th, the king visited South Wales, hard hit by world depression. He genuinely sympathized with the poor and unemployed. In what was taken as a direct challenge to Baldwin's government, he declared, "Something must be done." The Prime Minister would have been more unnerved by what the king planned to tell his youngest brother that night. That he would make Mrs. Simpson Queen, Empress of India, the whole bag of tricks. The king soon sensed a more realistic option: marry Mrs. Simpson, but not make her queen. He asked Stanley Baldwin to sound out the cabinet and the Dominion governments like Canada and Australia. Then an obscure bishop named Blunt suggested the king could use God's grace.
He made rather a silly speech in which he said he hoped that the king would be a little more religious than he had been, and that for some reason was the trigger, because the press, of course, had the story, and from then onwards it was a soap opera.
Liberated at last, the press told the British public about the abdication crisis for the first time. Wallace Simpson became the woman who'd stolen their beloved king. Hate mail poured in. There were threats to throw acid in her face, even to assassinate her. The king's aide, Dudley Forward, opened the letters himself.
England loathed her. Britain loathed her.
I'm always surprised that she was never murdered. They loathed her. And there are still people that loathe her too.
At her house in Cumberland Terrace, bricks were hurled through the windows. Mrs. Simpson fled to the south of France, where she sought refuge with old friends. From here, she issued a statement offering to give up the king. In a confidential letter, she had already told her aunt that she might have to do this. "I should cease to be as powerful or have all I have today," she wrote, "but I should be comfortably off and have had a most interesting experience."
She was prepared, in fact, would willingly have disappeared. But indeed, on one occasion, His Royal Highness did say to me, "Do you know, Wallace said that she'd go away and I'd never find her again." And I looked at her and said, "Wallace, if you think the King of England can't find a woman, there's something wrong with you, and I'll find you wherever you are."
Back in London, the cabinet was told by the Dominion governments that they would not accept Mrs. Simpson either as Queen or even as Edward's wife without the title of Queen. Baldwin had the king in checkmate. Waiting to be told his fate was the next in line to the throne, the Duke of York. "I feel like the proverbial sheep being led to the slaughter," he said. His wife Elizabeth complained, "Everyone knows more than we do. We know nothing, nothing." But there was still the possibility that the king might gather a party round him and refuse to go.
My opinion of the king, he should marry who he loves. He's been a good chap to the working class. That's my opinion of him.
What are your views on this?
I think the king should marry the woman he loves.
If he'd tried to create a king's party, if he'd done that, then he would have split the country. And then there would indeed have been the most terrible crisis in the monarchy, and in some ways the country would have been profoundly shaken. But that didn't happen. He went like a lamb.
It was very dark, gloomy, late autumn or winter day, and I well remember hearing, and we thought the world was coming to an end, roughly speaking. None of us wanted an abdication.
On Friday, December the 11th, 1936, the king broadcast his decision to the nation.
You all know the reasons which have impelled me to renounce the throne. Believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love.
I've never been so amazed in my life, because suddenly here was the king speaking in what to me was women's magazine language. I mean, that phrase, the woman I love, it just wasn't the way that a king spoke.
The abdication speech was, I thought, well done if you accepted the premise that you gave up thrones for love. And I think a lot of people felt if you were lucky enough to have a throne, don't give it up for love, unless the love is very suitable.
And when he started off by saying that, unlike his brother, he had no family, no wife and children to love, and therefore he needed the love of another woman, therefore he'd had to give up the throne. You felt you were losing your own family. And I'm not ashamed to admit it, I cried.
And now we all have a new king. God bless you all. God save the king. That the high and mighty Prince Albert, Frederick, Arthur, George.
Edward's reign had lasted only 10 months. What many now wondered was how long his brothers would last.
Liege Lord George VI.
God save the king.
The ceremony will be held as originally scheduled on May the 12th. Changing over from King Edward to King George, manufacturers go about their interrupted business, philosophically proceed to liquidate.
While preparations went on to crown King George VI king, those closest to him worried whether he could do the job. So did the king himself.
My first word must be one of praise for the enterprise, enthusiasm, and hard work which have made it possible.
He actually felt that he wasn't up to it. How could somebody so shy, who stammered so badly, who'd always been his brother's shadow, how could he suddenly take over the throne in such terrible circumstances?
When this country was still under the cloud of a long industrial depression.
I think he just felt the burden was too much for him. And so he broke down and sobbed on Queen Mary's shoulder. I think he had a sort of mini nervous breakdown there.
Edward VIII was glamorous, attractive, much admired around the world. George VI was a man of very limited charisma, who certainly wasn't a film star in the way that his elder brother was. So one of the problems, once George VI and Queen Elizabeth had taken over, was how to project them as a glamorous, publicly appealing couple. And the main way in which this was done was to stress the glamour and public appeal, not of the king, but of the Queen.
She was and is the most marvellous, sparky personality. He could never have done it without her. And she carried him along. And she had all the charismatic qualities that he so conspicuously lacked. But she was is also, extremely tough character, very tough, even ruthless character.
Cecil Beaton was brought along and took a whole series of photographs of Queen Elizabeth in Buckingham Palace. And these pictures, which were carefully photographed and carefully doctored and touched up, were extremely successful in projecting an image of, as it were, wholesome glamour, which Queen Elizabeth very much epitomised. He makes her look a great deal slimmer, a great deal sexier, and a great deal more glamorous. It's really cosmetic surgery, but you do it on the pictures rather than the person.
On the eve of coronation, it's a London transformed by decoration that meets the gaze of visitor and resident in every street. Along the Mall.
Despite the Queen's best efforts to give George VI confidence, he would have to take the coronation oath alone.
As the coronation drew near, certainly there were a lot of rumours about the state of the king's health, that he wouldn't be able to carry it through. But it got so bad that there were, bets on the stock exchange, rumours in the newspapers.
And book me 200 more coronation risk at the same price.
Defying the odds, the king bravely faced the ordeal of his coronation.
I think that he was carried through the actual ceremony by a deep sense of exaltation, of this anointing, which was a sort of sacred rite coming down from the Saxon kings.
In France, with her future husband, Mrs. Simpson listened to the coronation on the radio and later admitted all the while the mental image of what might have been and should have been kept forming, disintegrating and reforming in my mind. The pomp and circumstance blotted out the memories of Edward VIII. George VI gave the ex-king a new title, the Duke of Windsor. The Duke's first priority was to marry the woman for whom he'd sacrificed so much. The world's press flocked to the borrowed Château de Condé in the Loire, where the wedding took place. Sorely tried by many phone calls from his brother, the new king refused to answer any more, taking their cue from Queen Mary, who was implacably hostile to Mrs. Simpson. Edward's brothers did not come to the wedding. Edward's old friend, Major Fruity Metcalfe, was best man. His wife, Lady Alexandra, took many of the photos at the wedding.
There weren't very many friends at the wedding. May I read you my description of the wedding, because I think I wrote down there and then what I could better now. It was hard not to cry, and in fact I did. It could be nothing but pitiable and tragic to see a King of England of only 6 months ago, an idolized king, married under those circumstances. And yet, pathetic as it was, his manner was so simple and dignified, and he was so sure of himself in his happiness that it gave something to the sad little service which is hard to describe.
I think she was horrified. Can you imagine having to make somebody happy who has given up the world for you? What a responsibility.
An early blow to their happiness was struck by King George VI, who denied his brother's wife the title Her Royal Highness, which should have been hers by right. After the wedding, Dudley Forward knew that he had to convey the news to the unsuspecting Duke.
And that literally broke his heart. It was very a painful moment. And I had to say, I'm afraid, sir, she is not going to have the privilege of being Royal Highness. And perhaps I shouldn't say it, it's too intimate. His Royal Highness burst into tears on my shoulder and said to me, Dudley, you always will consider her our Royal Highness, won't you? And I said, sir, she will always be treated by me as if she was a Royal Highness.
He never forgave the family, and he never got over it. It remained a permanent sore. It affected almost everything that he did, you know.
The Duke and Duchess met novelist Barbara Cartland on their honeymoon in Paris, dining at Maxime's.
And I was watching them, because I was sitting like this, and they were there just there, and I could see. And he was saying, I want some butter. Waiter, I want some butter. Nobody brought him any butter. And I thought, isn't it awful when you give it up, when you give up the crown, when you give up the importance? That's the trouble. The waiter doesn't even pay any attention to you. It's really rather sad.
Feeling humiliated and angry, the Duke leapt at an offer to make an official visit to Nazi Germany.
He spoke an excellent German without any accent, and he tried to do everything to be nice to us. For instance, he was clicking the heels, what was a little bit ridiculous, so nobody even dared to tell him. Hitler was honored to have a former British king coming to the Obersalzberg.
The London Times of October the 13th reported, His Royal Highness acknowledged with smiles and the National Socialist salute the greetings of the crowds. He explained himself to Dudley Forward.
He once said to me, didn't I wave nicely? Wasn't that cunning? Or something like that. But then again, if you went to a country where they rub noses, well, you would rub noses. And therefore, if you give a Heil Hitler, it was merely good manners. But he certainly wanted to try and get over an embarrassment. The real embarrassment should have been that we shouldn't have been there.
I think that he caused his brother and his sister-in-law a very considerable anguish. I've little doubt of that. On the other hand, he didn't do that just to be offensive.
They liked it very much, what they have seen. And I must tell you, we showed them the best things, that's clear.
The Duke wasn't alone in wanting to see the best in Nazi Germany. A year later, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain went to Germany to try and appease Hitler. His efforts postponed war. On his return from Munich, with the piece of paper, which he thought promised peace, Chamberlain was congratulated and feted by the King and Queen, who were as committed to the popular policy of appeasement as the Duke of Windsor.
George VI, I think, made the biggest constitutional blunder that's been made by any sovereign this century. By appearing on, as he did, on the balcony of Buckingham Palace with Neville Chamberlain, was identifying himself with one party position on one of the most controversial issues of the day.
No one could ask a better day for the start of the royal tour.
The policy of appeasing Hitler failed. In March 1939, German troops moved into Czechoslovakia. In May, the King and Queen left London for America. Enthusiastic crowds broke through the police cordon. The King and Queen had accepted an invitation from Franklin Roosevelt, who wanted to strengthen links with Europe's democracies in the hope of deterring Hitler.
And perhaps never before has a newsreel camera captured such charming informal close-ups of almost every member of our royal family.
This was quite a brave thing for the King and Queen to do because the United States were, after all, Windsor territory in some ways. Wallis was an American. There was a lot of sympathy for the Windsors over there. There was a party called the Friends of the Duke of Windsor, and there was a great deal of feeling that the Duke of Windsor had been jockeyed off his throne and this kind of thing. Again, and there was personal prejudice against the king, thinking that he was virtually an idiot. The Queen was a dowdy old creature. And so they set off with considerable trepidation.
While they were at sea, the Duke of Windsor, living in France, tried to upstage his brother by broadcasting a peace message carried by NBC.
There is no land whose people want war. This I believe to be as true of the German nation as of the British nation to which I belong, as it is of you in America.
This is the first time in history that ruling British monarchs have ever set foot in the capital of the nation that once formed a part of their empire. Secretary Hull
The Duke and the King vied for America's attention. The clear winner was the King.
600,000 persons braved the heat to witness the most impressive welcome ever accorded capital visitor. The Queen and the First Lady are to ride
Most of the Americans were expecting a pretty dull, frowsty couple. And in fact, there have been many comparisons, not, as you imagine, polite ones, between Wallis Simpson's extreme chic and the Queen's alleged dowdiness. And I think they were all taken by surprise by how pretty she looked. I don't think you could ever have called her chic, but she was well dressed in a royal way. She had this beautiful smile, wonderful complexion, great charm, and looked like a queen. Roosevelt and the King established a personal relationship, a rather father-son relationship, and they discussed topics which would be of great interest should a world war break out.
The King and the Queen felt this trip had made them. It gave them the confidence and stature they would need in the trying days ahead. Shortly after their return, Britain declared war on Germany. Hitler's blitzkrieg swept across Europe. Britain was isolated. The war claimed the political life of the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, in whom the King had placed his faith. He was obliged to accept Winston Churchill, who had championed his brother Edward. Churchill dominated the hesitant King.
Of course, the problem for him throughout the war is that he's constantly outshone by Churchill.
That Hitler, with his tattered lackey Mussolini at his tail, and Admiral Darlan frisking at his side, pretends to build out of hatred, appetite, and racial assertion a new order for Europe.
Churchill is a man of Periclean and mesmeric eloquence. George VI stammers. Churchill is the warlord, the man who decides grand strategy. George VI wears uniforms but doesn't actually do anything. And he's not able to project himself as the kind of warrior king, which is what historically monarchs had always been.
Once again, it was the Queen instead who was projected as a national figure and as her husband's guiding light.
She was a very reassuring presence then, and one did have a feeling that she was a considerable contributor to the feeling that nothing could go wrong.
In November 1940, as the King and Queen sat near a window in Buckingham Palace, it was hit by 6 bombs.
It was bombed by a Dornier, which came straight down the Mall. One hit the chapel and more or less demolished it, and another one, I believe, fell inside the courtyard. And, of course, all the splinters went up, and this could have killed them both.
The King suspected the attack was part of a German plot to kill him and return his brother to the throne. The Queen took a more positive view. Now we can look the East End in the face, she said. Unlike many of the wealthy, the royal family stayed in London to face the Blitz during the day. Some felt they should send their daughters to Canada. The children won't leave London without me, said the Queen. I won't leave London without the King, and the King will never go. It was a remark a whole generation never forgot.
When King George VI and Queen Elizabeth came down to the East End to walk round, I think that really began the breakdown of the aloofness and the mystery of the unknown that we'd always imagined the royal family to be in. They were with us. And that was the difference. I mean, to see the present Queen as a young girl in an ATS uniform and a pair of dirty old dungarees underneath a car, getting it clean and straight, had to be seen to be believed. But it became that she was one of us.
Eleanor Roosevelt got the same sense of the royal family sharing the national austerity when she came to visit.
To welcome the President's wife on her visit to Britain, the King and Queen went in person to meet her train at Paddington.
Her bathtub at Buckingham Palace was limited to 5 inches of water. Her room was cold and draughty, but her dinner was served on gold plate. The exiled Duke of Windsor tried to join the war effort at home, but was fobbed off with a staff job in France.
I think he was disappointed at not being given a job in this country. But I quite understand why he wasn't, because it would have been very, very difficult, impossible for his brother.
The Windsors did their best to be patriotic until forced by the German invasion of France to become refugees. They fled to Spain, where they were suspected of treating with the enemy.
Hitler had the idea, and Ribbentrop, that they should use their old friend, the Duke of Windsor, as a possible king after the German victory, and they even offered him money. The idea was to be very generous to him if he shows publicly his sympathy for the German side.
The Nazis also plotted to kidnap the Windsors, but the Duke and Duchess were put out of harm's way. They were sent to the tiny colony of the Bahamas, where the Duke became governor.
I very much doubt that the British government has it in mind at the present that my official activities should extend beyond the confines of the Bahama Islands.
Here they nursed their grievances for the rest of the war. Back in London, the Duke's rival brother presided over the triumphant day of victory in Europe. Now firm friends with Churchill, they shared the glory together.
The whole of London was full of joy. I remember a song at the time, I'm going to get lit up when the lights go up in London. And this was rather the feeling.
King George and his family, whom he proudly called Us Four, had earned a lifetime's popularity. The hope for post-war change brought in a Labour government under Clement Attlee. The king reluctantly accepted the new regime.
Today, Great Britain is painfully aware of how great was the cost of the victory she won, how desperate were the wounds she sustained.
War had drastically reduced the empire's wealth. And even the brave show of the victory parade could not hide its weakness. The Indian regiments marching in the parade reminded the king that his empire was under threat. He was told he could not visit India. Instead, advised by the government, he had to watch his cousin Lord Mountbatten give the Indian Empire away. Everything's going, said the king, and soon I shall have to go too. George VI mourned the loss of empire privately. Plagued by lifelong illness, he often boiled over.
He would suddenly get extremely annoyed about some quite trivial thing, and sort of there would be a violent explosion, and it would be absolutely terrifying.
Although he could not go to India, in 1947 the king and his family did go to South Africa, then in the Commonwealth. As they drove through tumultuous crowds, the king became increasingly nervous. Peter Townsend was in the car with him.
I was up in front next to the chauffeur. I must have heard a shout or something behind. I noticed, I think, two black hands gripping the hood. The hood was down, gripping the hood like that. And the Queen, with her parasol, was bashing these two black hands. And finally, I remember a policeman just in front, he caught hold of this man and knocked him out, I suppose. And the reason why he made this extraordinary dash, he explained later, was that he wanted to give Princess Elizabeth 10 shillings for her birthday.
Princess Elizabeth received more presents when she returned to England to marry the man she loved. He was Lord Mountbatten's nephew. After war service in the Royal Navy, Prince Philip of Greece had taken the Mountbatten name with British nationality. The wedding was a rare distraction from the austerity of 1947. Among the wedding presents were the collected clothing coupons of the cabinet. Other brides protested that there were no extra coupons for them. What few noticed were the absentees.
For the people who had come from afar, the wedding was a family wedding for the entire British people. Outside the palace, 100,000 people surged forward in a solid mass. They wanted Elizabeth. They wanted Philip.
The family guest list displayed the dynasty's instinct for self-preservation.
Part of the king's survival policy from the monarchy after the war was a cutting off of those German relations. None of them were asked to the wedding of Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip, although Prince Philip's sisters were married German aristocrats.
Another absentee was the Duke of Windsor. He now realized he was condemned to a life sentence in luxurious exile with his wife, cut off from the family.
There he was leading this utterly trivial life of sort of playing golf and going to the theatre and going on holiday. But what did it mean, going on holiday? I mean, life was one big holiday. And, you know, one just thought, how tragic to think that this man was the King of England, and this is what life has become.
Despite his sadness, the Duke retained his health, but the pressure had virtually destroyed his younger brother. Soon he had to have a series of operations.
I'm glad to say that he continues to make most excellent progress.
The king had his lung removed, but was not told he had cancer. The media downplayed the gravity of his illness.
It is good to see His Majesty looking so well.
On January the 31st, 1952, King George saw Princess Elizabeth off on a Commonwealth tour. It was to be their last farewell.
The king walked with death, as if death were a companion, an acquaintance whom he recognized and did not fear. In the end, death came as a friend.
Churchill, once again Prime Minister, adopted the motto of the Victoria Cross for his message on the King's wreath. It said simply, "For valor." Although he attended his brother's funeral, the Duke of Windsor was not invited to the funeral lunch. The Windsor women closed ranks against the man they blamed for the premature death of the king. The royal matriarchy was center stage. The burden of the crown now fell upon the 25-year-old Elizabeth II.
Purchase The Windsors, A Royal Family on home video cassette for $59.95 plus shipping and handling. To order this 4-hour series, call 1-800. funding for the Windsors, a royal family, has been provided by the Corporation for Funding for the Windsors, a royal family, has been provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the annual financial support of viewers like you.
I think what the average person doesn't realise is that they don't really have what I would call a wide circle of friends. We lived in this top flat in Kensington, and she climbed the stairs, and I remember her telling me it was the first time she'd ever been in a flat. I was utterly amazed. She would be rather wistful at times, and often I remember her saying, "I wish I could be more like you, Eileen. But unfortunately, my life is such that I can't."
There is a motto which has been borne by many of my ancestors, a noble motto: I serve. Through the inventions of science, I can make my solemn act of dedication with the whole empire listening. I should like to make that dedication now. It is very simple. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
On January the 31st, 1952, King George VI bade farewell to his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, and her husband, Philip. Illness prevented him from making this trip to East Africa, the first stop on a Commonwealth tour. A week later, they left their lodge in Kenya to watch wildlife from a remote lookout post called Treetops.
Our time at Treetops was a magical time. And it was, you know, this tiny, tiny house built up in this giant fig tree. It was so exciting because this wonderful observation platform looking down onto the salt lick. And at night, all the elephants come. And the Queen loved it because, of course, she could use her cine camera.
There was a ladder that went to a little platform at the top of the tree. And we climbed up, and we actually saw this incredible iridescent light that comes before sunrise over the jungle, which I'm sure she'll never forget.
Exhausted after a long night at the lookout, they returned to their lodge to sleep. Meanwhile, Princess Elizabeth's private secretary had gone into town, where he was accosted by a journalist.
He said, "Come here, come here." And so we went into the telephone booth together, and I remember he was trying to take a cigarette out of the pack with trembling hands. And he said, "The King's dead." Well, that was a shock, I can tell you.
I noticed this radio on the shelf in the study, so very carefully closing the door as close as I could, I then switched up the radio very low and hunted around on it, and eventually I found the overseas wavelength of the BBC.
This is London. It is with the greatest sorrow that we make the following announcement. It was announced from Sandringham at 10:45 today, February the 6th, 1952, that the King, who retired to rest last night in his usual health, passed peacefully away in his sleep earlier this morning. The BBC is now closing down for the rest of the day, except for the advertised news bulletins and summaries, shipping forecasts and gale warnings.
So, switch off, I went round and woke Prince Philip up and told him. And it was his job to tell the Queen. Probably the worst moment of his life, to have to do that. And all he could say was, this will be a terrible blow. He took her out into the garden, and they walked up and down, slowly up and down the lawn, while he talked and talked and talked to her.
After a short while, the princess came back, and so I went and gave her a hug. I mean, all one thought of was that her father's dead. She adores her father, and how sad. And really, it was only, you know, later on, one thought, my God, it's the king who's dead. And so I didn't even curtsy to her then. It was only later on, obviously, that I, you know, started curtsying to her properly like that.
And then I did what I had to do, which is say, now the only question I have to ask you at this stage is what do you wish to be called when you're on the throne? She said, oh, my own name, of course, Elizabeth. So I said, right, Elizabeth II.
The high and mighty Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become Queen Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen of this realm, and of all her other realms and territories.
From Australia to the Arctic, Elizabeth was proclaimed Queen. Her realm included 9 Commonwealth countries and a colonial empire around the globe.
In the meantime, we went into action to get the whole thing packed up, because the first thing we knew, instinctively, is we had to go straight back to London.
The Queen's secretary asked the press to respect her privacy and take no pictures as they prepared to drive to the airport.
Now, you'll hardly believe this, but by the side of the road were all the press photographers, with their cameras hanging in their left hand and waving with their right hand like that. Well, I don't think you could do that now.
When she returned to London, the Queen was met by her veteran Prime Minister, Winston Churchill.
As we taxied up, the Queen looked out and could see that her car, her little Austin Princess, wasn't there. And all the big royal black limousines were there. And she said, oh God, they sent the hearses. And one knew somehow that, you know, suddenly there was this 25-year-old woman, and it was completely the end of her private life, that all the fun she'd had with her husband and her children, this had come to an end, and that she was facing this lifetime of public work.
The new reign coincided with the end of wartime restrictions in Britain. The government even abolished rationing of candy in time for the coronation.
There was an astonishing mood about the coronation of 1953, which I think will never be recaptured. There was then a sense of hope and excitement about the future. People talked a great deal about the new Elizabethan age. Britain had just climbed Mount Everest. Churchill was back in Downing Street. There was a sense in which the coronation was the kind of present for having done so well in the Second World War. And everybody was very hopeful and ardent and excited about a future which they believed would be as great as the past that had gone before.
We sang songs like Rule Britannia and Land of Hope and Glory, and I think my own children now would find it very difficult to understand that sort of communal spirit in a crowd of that kind. And everyone felt this sense of a new Elizabethan age beginning with a queen who wasn't very much older than we were.
Everybody had been starved not only of bread and meat and butter, but also of light and colour and excitement. And there came to the throne this dazzling creature, and you can't believe what she looked like, particularly when she put a tiara on. I mean, she really looked marvellous, with wonderful eyes and, you know, and a lovely, lovely smile. And a gallant, handsome consort. What more can you want?
The coach took about 15 seconds to pass us at a slow walking pace. It looked absolutely fabulous. And inside, a tiny little queen looking really fragile, as if she were made of porcelain. It was just a wonderful moment. We'd waited all that time in the rain to see her. And there she was, looking absolutely magnificent, a symbol of everything we hoped for.
There was a debate about whether a wider audience should see the coronation through the new medium of television. The cabinet decided not to allow cameras into Westminster Abbey. But the Queen had the last word.
The Queen, I think, understood, which apparently the cabinet didn't fully understand, that here's this new medium, television, which would made it possible for the public to see this great ceremony. And I think she saw the point of this straight away, and she was the one who finally said, yes, television would be shown, would be allowed into the Abbey. None of us will ever see anything like it again. And here's something that Hollywood couldn't possibly invent.
Churchill had worried that television would interfere with the dignity of the occasion. Strict rules were drawn up about what could be shown.
I had a centre button which was there in case of emergency. One reason for the centre button was the rule that there should be no close-ups. Now, the Queen had been crowned. She was coming down the aisle. I can see her now. Gorgeous it was. And she came closer and closer and closer. Under no circumstances would I have pushed that censor button. I thought the picture was gorgeous. She was gracious. She looked beautiful. And I will never forget it.
The coronation had all the magic of a fairy tale.
One of the functions of the royal family in the minds of people is to be the continuing story of Peyton Place. The story goes on, and of course, in that story, there is always somebody who's not actually behaving as they should be. Or if you'd like to put it differently, in any archetypal situation, there is always the wicked fairy. Or the dark princess, if you like. I mean, the archetypal picture of the princess is with lovely golden hair, but her sister has black hair, doesn't she? And she is the subject of the moon, not of the sun. And so I think that in order to give a bit of spice to the affair, there's always got to be something going slightly wrong.
What was going wrong was that the Queen's sister, Princess Margaret, was having a secret romance.
She was absolutely lovely, really lovely, enormous eyes, and absolutely beautiful. And she had great grace, and she really was outstanding.
I think people forget now quite what glamour she did have. I mean, she had the same sort of star quality that the Princess of Wales has now got.
The man she was in love with was Group Captain Peter Townsend, who was attached to the royal household.
One's job was to be there to serve and to be on call. Often during evenings at Sandringham, there was a game of canasta. The Queen Mother, the Princess Elizabeth, and Princess Margaret, perhaps some other chap. And sometimes I was asked to join in. I'm not a man for indoor games, and I'm quite a stupid card player, but somehow I got inveigled into playing this game, which became a scream. You know, you're cheating or you're not, but always with gales of laughter.
Peter Townsend travelled the world with the royal family. When Princess Margaret was 16, they all went on a long tour of South Africa.
It was the most natural thing in the world that they should fall for each other. The only tiresome thing was, well, there was a 16-year age difference. He already had a wife, even if it wasn't going well. Big hurdles to overcome.
On Coronation Day itself, the secret romance was discovered in a telltale moment.
After the coronation, when they were all standing in the porch of Westminster Abbey waiting for their coaches, all feeling rather worn out, Princess Margaret, with a sort of very happy look, picked a piece of cotton fluff off Group Captain Townsend's uniform and sort of brushed her hand along the medals. And this was certainly picked up.
American newspapers ran the story. By now, Peter Townsend was divorced. Courtiers and ministers reminded the Queen of the abdication crisis, when divorce had rocked the throne.
They would have said, I don't think it's proper that your sister, ma'am, should marry somebody who is divorced. That's the way the cookie crumbled in those days. I mean, divorce now is, it's a small change of life, isn't it, really? It wasn't in those days. It was big stuff.
Townsend was banished to Brussels, where a new post was invented for him, air attaché. The timing was cruel. He was sent away while Margaret was on tour with her mother. Hoping that the romance would fade away, the palace told Margaret to wait 2 years, until she was 25, when she could marry without the Queen's consent. But Margaret's predicament worried the Queen.
She was very protective to Princess Margaret, who was much more sort of fun-loving and, you know, in a way, more brilliant. She had got great natural gifts of she could have gone on the stage any time she liked and been a huge success.
From earliest childhood, Princess Margaret was always seen as the naughty, funny one, and Princess Elizabeth as the sensible one, as in the 1940 wartime broadcast to the children of the Empire.
We know, every one of us, that in the end all will be well, for God will care for us and give us victory and peace. And when peace comes, remember, it will be for us, the children of today, to to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place. My sister is by my side, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
When Princess Margaret was 25, the country eagerly awaited a decision. But she was faced with a brutal choice. If she married the man she loved, she must give up her royal title and her income. The press encroached as never before, but the palace offered little help.
The press officer himself was a perfectly decent chap. All I remember his saying to me was, don't speak to the press. Well, it's not all that easy. I had to fight my own little battle. It was a great trial, of course, trying to keep more or less one's cool when being plied with questions and snapped with cameras.
Finally, the decision was announced.
The love and affection, sympathy and understanding of the nation and Commonwealth go out to Princess Margaret. And now she says, mindful of the Church's teaching that Christian marriage is indissoluble, and conscious of my duty to the Commonwealth, I have resolved to put these considerations before any others. I have reached this decision entirely alone, and in doing so, I have been strengthened by the unfailing support and devotion of Group Captain Townsend. I am deeply grateful for the concern of all those who have constantly prayed for my happiness.
I think there was very strong opinion on Princess Margaret's side. The sight of this pretty young girl being coerced by the Archbishop of Canterbury, by the Prime Minister, and made to utter kind of rather pompous sentence about she had come to realise that she owed it to the Commonwealth not to do it. This struck one as very odd. And there was an awful feeling that this poor girl had been bullied.
The popular press concluded that Princess Margaret had been a victim of the establishment, sacrificed for an old-fashioned principle.
I don't think it's quite fair to say she was sacrificed, no. She may have sacrificed herself, but that's not quite the same thing.
She was a bird born in a gilded cage, so to speak. She was born into that life of what most of us would see as a very captive sort of life. And I think that she would have found it very difficult to live as an ordinary person. They've never had to sort of do their own shopping. They've never had to do any of the, take their clothes to the cleaners. They've never had to do any of the ordinary things.
I think giving up that marriage was tragic, really, and was a cause of enormous sadness in her life. And that since then things have changed so much that it wouldn't matter one little bit today. She was full of vitality and full of the joys of life. It was a personal tragedy for her.
The Queen's empire had shrunk, replaced by self-governing Commonwealth nations. She delighted in her duties as head of the Commonwealth. Her welcomes everywhere were effusive. Australia was no exception.
All I ask you to remember is that every man, woman and child who even sees you with a passing glimpse as you go by will remember it with joy. In the words of the old 17th century poet who read those famous words, I did but see her passing by, and yet I love her till I die.
But behind the pomp, there were problems. Prince Philip had expected to become an admiral. Instead, he found himself trailing 3 paces behind his wife.
He used to say, you know, I'm neither one thing nor the other. I'm nothing. But whether he really meant that, I think it's just frustration, a lot of it.
After all, Prince Philip was basically a man. And he was a big man. And he was a man's man, too. I think there must have been moments when it would have been pretty heavy for him to take.
Prince Philip of Greece was Lord Louis Mountbatten's nephew. He had been brought up by the Mountbatten family and had taken its name.
Prince Philip was a breath of fresh air, really, to us, because my sister and I were just 2 girls in the family, and we'd had no brothers. And here was this, even in those days, rather glamorous first cousin. Although he was Prince Philip of Greece, he was certainly far from being dark and swarthy. He was a blue-eyed blonde, and therefore a sort of Viking appearance.
Princess Elizabeth met him when she was 13 on a visit to Dartmouth Naval College, organised by Lord Louis Mountbatten for the royal family.
The cadet who was told to look after the princesses was Prince Philip. Princess Elizabeth was dazzled by him. He was rather grand and rather sort of offhand. These 2 little gals who were a lot younger than him. But he did everything wonderfully well, and he was very good looking. When they finally left, he followed them in a little sailing boat. He zigzagged up and down the River Dart after them, waving. I think from then on, he was the young man in her life. We've all had young men in our lives at that moment, but she was being very single-minded and very determined, never changed. I'm sure Lord Louis Mountbatten was delighted about it, and I'm sure he must have fostered it.
Mountbatten was a passionate plotter. He loved conniving, fixing things, pulling strings. He did so with the most transparent, small, boyish obviousness.
In 1946, Mountbatten organised his elder daughter's wedding, where Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip were thrown together again.
Hearty cheering accompanied every car through the town. Meanwhile, at the entrance to the Abbey, Prince Philip of Greece waits to escort the royal family from their car. Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, both acting as bridesmaids, wore very attractive full-skirted dresses of pale blue.
They were engaged soon afterwards. It was a dream come true for Lord Mountbatten. He now expected the royal family to take his name.
He cared desperately about the name, and he always believed that the royal house should be not the House of Windsor, but the House of Mountbatten-Windsor. He was defeated on that. He was defeated again and again. He kept coming back, he kept chipping away.
The government was wary of Mountbatten's influence on the Queen. The Prime Minister Winston Churchill insisted that the royal family name should remain Windsor.
He was an old, very experienced man. She was very young and a new queen, and understandably felt perhaps it wasn't her duty to stand up to him and say, no, I don't want to do this. And as I'm sure everybody would understand, it was very hurting, I think, to Prince Philip that the one thing he felt he'd brought to his marriage, which was his name, was no longer possible.
I'm just a bloody amoeba, complained Philip. With his private secretary, Mike Parker, an old Navy friend, he explored life outside the palace. Once a week, they went off secretly to Soho to lunch with actors, writers and photographers. They called it the Thursday Club.
I often used to wonder why Mike got back rather pleased on Thursday evening. And I said to him, what is it you do on a Thursday? And then he told me, you see, and I was quite horrified. I said, well, as long as you're relaxing, but don't for goodness get found out.
The Queen rather enjoyed the stories that we would unfold after being at the Thursday Club. But her immediate reaction as we came through the door was one of reeling back a little, because we'd probably been smelling somewhat from a glass of port or two at the end of lunch.
In 1956, Prince Philip, still looking for a role, went off on a 6-month world tour accompanied by Mike Parker. While they were away, Mike Parker's wife sued him for divorce. The press seized the opportunity to imply that Prince Philip's marriage was also on the rocks because of his long absence. The palace acted immediately to keep the royal family away from scandal. Mike Parker had to go.
As I descended steps from the aircraft, I saw a chap from the palace, the household, who told me that a press conference had been arranged. I was so pleased to see a friendly face and so on. And then I was absolutely stunned when he looked at me and he said, well, from now on, you're on your own.
In Prince Philip's absence, the country had faced an international crisis. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal Company. In response, Britain and France invaded the canal zone. Admiral Mountbatten helped plan the invasion, against his better judgment.
Mountbatten was passionately and almost publicly opposed to Suez. He wrote 2 letters of resignation. He repeatedly told ministers that he thought the operation was politically lunatic and militarily unsound. It would be impossible for him to have opposed it more strongly and remained in office. Whether in any way the Queen shared those views, I have no idea. My personal guess would be that she would have felt very much the same way about it.
The country was divided over Suez and humiliated when Britain was forced to withdraw. Suez bred a mood of national self-doubt, which extended to the role of the Queen, symbol of the new Elizabethan age. The Queen was criticised for the first time by the editor of the National and English Review.
To judge from your article, you expect the Queen to have qualities of a wit. You would like her to be a better orator. You would like her to be a TV personality, in addition to being a diligent, dutiful and devoted monarch and a mother.
All I would like to see is the Queen's own character coming through. And I know that if her character is allowed to come through, the effect will be terrific. The effect at the moment is, frankly, not terrific. And that's not a criticism of her. That's a criticism of the way the thing is organised.
As I was leaving the building after the interview, an elderly man, no doubt a good deal younger than I am now, but he seemed to be very elderly at the time, approached me and gave me a real wallop on the side of the face. My article was regarded by an enormous number of people as virtually high treason.
I felt that something had to be done about it. I realized that Prince Philip could not do it himself or any other member of the royal family.
Happy Christmas. 25 years ago, my grandfather broadcast the first of these Christmas messages. Today is another landmark.
In an effort to make the Queen more accessible, the palace televised her Christmas message.
Homes on Christmas Day. My own family often gather round to watch television, as they are at this moment. And that is how I imagine you now. I very much hope that this new medium will make my Christmas message more personal and direct.
Things really didn't change at all in the royal household and in the royal routine. In what was advertised as being a great new age. I mean, the propaganda hype at the time was this was a great new age, new Elizabethan age, all that sort of thing. Nothing new was happening at all.
Despite more exposure to the cameras, the Queen and her growing family seemed out of touch with the modern world.
It must be incredibly difficult for someone as hedged in by protocol, by rules, by manners, to see anything of the real world. You can be told about it, but to watch its view of you changing and to evaluate that and to know how much you ought to adapt to that, that must be incredibly hard. And there, of course, you need very far-sighted advisors. You need people of real perception, not easy to find.
John Grigg felt the courtiers were to blame.
I think the grain of truth was that I think that we were a bit stuffy. You know, tweedy was the word John used. Tweedy. Tweedy was the word. Quite a clever word.
We laughed it off. We laughed it off. We didn't mind being called tweedy. It was largely, if in fact you go to Sandringham in the depth of winter, you've never got to wear tweeds to survive.
Princess Margaret was moving with the times. She had married a society photographer, Tony Armstrong-Jones.
These were a new kind of royals. They had far more contacts, but among writers and artists, designers, and so forth, not among stuffy courtiers. And they looked freer, and they became the new family model of fast-travelling, hard-working, affluent, high-spending young people.
The Queen was greeted by her cousin, Earl Mountbatten of Burma, who also welcomed his nephew, Prince Philip. They had come to see the preview of a visual autobiography of the life and times of Lord Mountbatten.
Lord Mountbatten was keen to move the monarchy into the television age. His son-in-law later suggested making a documentary about the private life of the Queen and her family.
It was really felt by a lot of people, our friends and people in the family, that it was sad that the country didn't realize what type of people they were, the Queen and Prince Philip and her children. Most particularly, I think, the Queen, who was rather seen as a figurehead and not known, sort of not understood, I don't think, by the public.
see if she's... we should be able to let the puppies out here, sir.
Yes, try. Yes, try. You must.
Love their big ears and their big paws.
Lovely big tummy bladders. Except you are making it very nice and jacket. Aren't you?
The Queen was tremendously cooperative, and I think had very little problem really with the cameras. I think she was finding it more difficult with the sound recording. You know, she wasn't used to suddenly to look down and find a microphone down just underneath her face.
Anybody else want any carrots? Let's see what these do.
The first film about the royal family was one of the most skillfully executed propaganda exercises which I certainly can remember. I certainly at the time would have said that it was a masterstroke, a superb piece of public relations. And I suspect a lot of other people too have progressively wondered more and more whether in the long run it was a sensible thing to do. But if the royal family are prepared to make a film taking you into their house, taking you to their picnics, then why shouldn't the paparazzi sneak around in rhododendrons taking pictures of royal princesses bathing? But they were fair game, and I think you could argue that that film symbolised the launching of the royal family down a long and very dangerous descent.
In the same week their film was broadcast, the royal family orchestrated another television spectacular. In an ancient castle in Wales, Prince Charles was formally invested as Prince of Wales. Princess Margaret's husband, now Lord Snowdon, played a central part in a uniform he designed for the occasion.
The dais will be about there. And one wants to think of it.
He had also designed the set, especially for television.
And I think that this looks super, I must say. I'm absolutely plain slate. But the important thing about the dais is so that cameras can come in from behind and from in front.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship. And faith and truth I will bear unto thee, to live and die against all manner of folks.
It was a kind of charade acted out in a Welsh castle. Partly, I think, a deliberate intention of bringing forward the young, of making it clear that the middle-aged, moving slowly towards being elderly members of the royal family were not the whole story, but a new generation was coming on, a new generation filled with promise and romantic and glamorous and bound to lead the country into new and better ways. In a way, it was an attempt almost to start the new Elizabethan age all over again.
I know perhaps some people would think that it is rather anachronistic and out of place in this world, which is perhaps somewhat cynical. But I think it can mean quite a lot if one goes about it in the right way.
The family were congratulated on another television success. A few weeks later came a television blunder. Prince Philip announced that the royal family would soon go into the red and pleaded royal poverty.
Inevitably, if nothing happens, we shall either have to, I don't know, we may have to move into smaller premises, who knows?
Well, you've had to close down certain large houses, such as Sandringham, haven't you? I understand from this dispatch.
No, not altogether. We've closed down. Well, we're interested. He had a small yacht which he had to sell, and I should probably have to give up polo fairly soon since I go.
Prince Philip's remarks brought the issue into the public arena, forcing the government to discuss the royal pay raise in a parliamentary select committee. One of its members was the royals' most outspoken critic.
When Prince Philip comes along and says he'll have to engage in the supreme hardship of doing without his polo and going into a suburban semi-detached, it really is more than I can bear.
The royal family had parliamentary supporters who ensured a pay raise. Prince Philip continued to play polo. Over the years, the debate over supporting the royal family continued, but the tone of the press grew more cynical.
You see, the point really is this, that it wasn't just a question of pounds, shillings and pence as we had in those days, but it was really a question of how is the monarchy run and is it good value for money?
Princess Margaret, critics complained, did not give value for money. In 1976, she appeared on the front page of the News of the World, on holiday in Moustique with her friend Roddy Llewellyn. This drove the palace to announce her separation from Lord Snowdon.
When the Snowdon marriage broke up, I think the dream family began to shatter. That was the first of them. I mean, it looks very tame now because the others have gone so spectacularly public. Private Eye had a cover at the time of the two of them sitting in a car, and Margaret was saying, "What's all this about us rowing in public?" And he was saying, "Shut up, you bitch, and keep smiling."
25 years after she had been denied permission to marry a divorced man, Princess Margaret herself was divorced, and she had become the first casualty of a new critical mood.
I don't think there's any doubt that from the late 1970s, we have, in a sense, moved into a new world for the monarchy, a harsher world, a less happy world, a less deferential world. We can see a growing sense of anxiety about the British nation, about the British economy, about Britain's place in the world.
A series of bitter industrial disputes had produced a deeply divided nation and forced a general election. Sectarian troubles in Ireland had spilled over into mainland Britain. In such gloomy times, there was a reluctance to celebrate the Queen's Silver Jubilee.
It was a grim time. The post-war consensus was over, England wasn't working, and the Jubilee seemed like an attempt to paper over these cracks with faded coronation wallpaper. It was the coronation revisited, but for a lot of us, it didn't really work anymore.
We've got flags here which start off for all size people. If there's any little men, they've got little flags from 4p, 7p, and we can get bigger ones, which you can't afford yet, because we haven't collected a lot.
9 months before the date, most people were going around grumbling, saying, who wants a Jubilee, and the whole thing's a perfectly absurd idea, and it'll all be false, and it'll all be artificial. And then, little by little, the popular mood adopted it and whipped it up and whipped themselves up into a kind of frenzy of appreciation. Partly, I think, reflecting genuine affection and respect for the Queen. Partly just instinct that it was great fun to have a jolly.
The Queen saw it as a momentous time because it was really the first time she realized the affection in which she was felt. And it made her feel incredibly humble. Why, what have I done to deserve this? Because I've only just done my duty.
The Queen's Jubilee brought back memories of a past that seemed golden and a more united kingdom. But this was a different nation now. 2 years later, its divisions struck at the heart of the royal family itself.
It was a most lovely, sunny bank holiday Monday. We just went out round the harbour and we were just going to pick up the lobster pots. And the IRA had obviously been sitting, watching us all getting into the boat, these old people and these children. And they just waited till they thought it was a suitable moment and set off the bomb that had been planted in the boat. The bomb was found under the engine, and so as my father was driving, he was killed instantly. The boat was blasted to smithereens, and so many of the bits of wood were found in my sister's skin, even in her eyeballs. They could tell it was a green wooden boat, and you could see all these bits of green wood coming out of her later. He went out like a shooting star. And I think that's the way he perhaps would have chosen, perhaps not by an IRA bomb, but I mean, that sort of a death.
Charles, Prince of Wales, had been close to Lord Mountbatten. His great-uncle's death left the heir to the throne dangerously adrift. A young woman later told Charles, "You looked so sad. It was the most tragic thing I've ever seen. My heart bled for you." That young woman's name was Diana. A decade begins with a storybook wedding and ends with unprecedented scandal and public outrage. To the Queen's deep dismay, the young royals show off, cavort, and tell all.
It makes my life real torture, I've decided.
Meanwhile, the Queen must contend with a power struggle at the highest level, with an assault on her life, and with the near destruction of Windsor Castle. In July 1981, Charles, Prince of Wales, married his princess, the Lady Diana Spencer.
One had such hopes that, you know, she would really be the supportive wife that he needed, and that would give him all the encouragement that his job requires.
This is the embodiment of the nation, the Crown Prince marrying a woman plucked from obscurity. These are great archetypal figures. They carry our expectations, our hopes, our anxieties, our prejudices. The little ladies knitting in their homes are making predictions on whether this is a genuine romantic marriage or it's a marriage of convenience. How long will it last? What are going to be the tensions? Will there be children? What will they be like? How are they going to survive? When will he be king?
Charles was only 3 when his mother became queen. A shy boy, he lacked the confidence of his sister, Anne.
He seemed to be totally different from Princess Anne, because she would go wholeheartedly into it, but he would hesitate over many, many things. He would sort of be holding back. "Should I go, Nanny?" he would say. "Oh, well, yes, you can go, Nanny," like what he would say. So he would be rest assured if she gave him permission.
I think it has always been unfortunate that the chemistry between Prince Philip and Prince Charles has not been the same as the chemistry that exists between him and Princess Anne. Prince Charles tends much more to be intimidated.
Prince Philip was the dominant figure in his son's education. He saw to it that Charles left the safe world of governesses for boarding schools.
Dear little boy. And I felt very sorry for him being sent to Cheam, because I think that was rather tough. I don't mind saying that, because I think if you've been brought up at Buckingham Palace to suddenly go to quite a tough boarding school, horrid other little boys teasing one, I think that he did have rather a miserable time.
Philip sent him on to the tough, remote school at Gordonston, where he himself had been a star.
He had a vision of what his son should be, and Charles didn't live up to it. He wanted a real man's man. He wanted a blunt, outspoken, sportsman, rough and tumble sort of guy. And I think that Charles grew up believing that he was not much good.
Charles also grew up to find that he was the world's most eligible bachelor. He had a series of romances, but Charles was cautious about marriage.
In my position, you're going to marry somebody who perhaps one day is going to become queen. And you've got to choose somebody very carefully, I think, who could fulfill this particular role. Because people like you, perhaps, would expect quite a lot from somebody like that. And it's got to be somebody pretty special.
There were some women that he did care very deeply for, and I think that Camilla Parker Bowles was one of those, Camilla Shand, as she was. I mean, people have said to me that he loved Camilla more than any woman before or since Diana.
Lord Mountbatten encouraged him to hold back from marriage and play the field. Charles was very close to Mountbatten. He called him Uncle Dickie.
He respects everything that Dickie said to him. He loved Dickie, and he was the one person who understood him and helped him, you see, and understood that he was a brilliant person underneath and tried to bring him out. You do see, having had a very difficult father, I'm not being unkind, but I mean, he is a German.
Lord Mountbatten was murdered in 1979 by the Irish Republican Army.
The willpower and the strength which went into enabling him to give that address in the Abbey was terrific, because he found it very, very hard to do.
They that go down to the sea in ships and occupy their business in great waters, these men see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep.
They were so close that he lost somebody every bit as close to him as my father was to my sister and me.
Charles went into a very, very severe decline. He really lost, he almost lost the will to carry on. I mean, it was a crushing blow to him.
He was much more of a rather lonely, frustrated, quite timid figure, I think largely as a result of his very, very sheltered upbringing, than his public persona led people to believe, and totally haunted by his quest for a bride.
The pressure on Prince Charles to find a bride came from within him as much as anywhere, because he would realise that as the future king, he had to get married and produce heirs for the throne.
The press went to great lengths to find out who the ladies were in Charles's life, including spying on his morning fishing.
Suddenly, I saw just the tip of a green-booted Wellington sticking out from behind a pine tree, and I could see this person had a makeup mirror in her hand and was doing nothing to her face, but was looking back across the river to see who or what was there.
This was the beginning of a long relationship between Lady Diana Spencer and the press. Charles's latest girlfriend was the youngest daughter of the 8th Earl Spencer, a former palace aide, and no stranger to royal life. When Diana was a child of 6, her parents had split up, and she left school with few qualifications.
She was 19. She was very innocent, very unworldly, unsophisticated.
How well are you coping with all the press attention? Well, as you can see, you can tell. Are you bearing up with it quite well, though? Because it must be quite a strain with all of us after you.
Well, it is, naturally.
There were many restrictions on his choice. He couldn't marry a Catholic by law, couldn't marry a divorcee by tradition, couldn't marry a girl of blemished reputation, had to be a virgin.
11 a.m., Buckingham Palace. The beginning of a day to remember for Prince Charles, Lady Diana, and for quite a lot of other people too. The long-awaited, much written about engagement had happened.
Can you find the words to sum up how you feel today, both of you?
Difficult to find the right sort of word, isn't it, really? Just delighted and happy. And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Yes.
She was extremely gentle, very shy, and she was someone that, as a young girl, you thought was everything a princess should be. Very beautiful, very young, very calm, and yet there was a certain nervousness about her. The feeling inside the cathedral, I remember, was just enormous. It's a very sort of hollow place, but it was filled with so many people and so much warmth and, you know, excitement.
Charles, Philip, Arthur, George, wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honor and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto her, so long as you both shall live?
I will. I look back on the marriage of the Prince and Princess of Wales as one of the greatest things I've ever seen. There's a tremendous feeling of excitement about it, and it looked perfect. I saw no clouds on the horizon. I saw nothing but sunshine and happiness.
The celebrations of July 1981 dazzled the British people. At the same time, other parts of the country were hit by the worst riots of the century.
We were offered in very poignant juxtaposition two very different alternative images of England. We had the riots at Toxteth and elsewhere in Britain, which presented a picture of a deprived, unhappy, disadvantaged population living in a nation that they were not proud to belong to and living in a nation that they were not at ease with.
The nation had a new Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, whose toughness would bring conflict with the royals as it did with the rioters.
Nothing can justify, nothing can excuse, and no one can condone the appalling violence we've all seen on television, which some of our people have actually experienced, and so many fear.
The Queen herself, during this time of social stress and high unemployment, was not immune to violence. She was threatened in the summer of the royal wedding. An unemployed youth fired 6 shots at the Queen during a ceremonial parade. They were blanks. The Queen calmed her horse and rode on, but more danger was not far away. An unemployed man was able to climb into Buckingham Palace and wander into the Queen's bedroom.
I wasn't doing anything wrong, I was just going to speak to the Queen. I passed the corgi food on the way. I saw corgi food. I knew, you know, I actually knew I was going to find the Queen's room straight away. It was almost like boom, boom, boom. I was in the Queen's room within minutes.
The appalling problem it must have faced her with of how to keep apart this man with his thumb dripping with blood and her team of extremely excited corgis. Who knows what they could have done to him if they found out what was happening.
I drew back the curtain, look at the face, and it must have startled her. And she jumped up and she said, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here? Get out, get out." So I was quite stunned, really. I mean, if I was going to ask the Queen any questions, I suppose I picked the wrong place. Maybe I should have come at dinner time.
The Queen's reaction was basically, who on earth is this person? And then, on realising, quietly talking him through things. And she once said to me that the thing I was really worried about was that Prince Philip was going to burst in and all hell was going to break loose.
The Queen faced bigger problems that summer. Britain sent a task force to the Falklands to expel the Argentine army which had invaded the islands.
The conflict in the Falkland Islands was thrust on us by naked aggression. And we are naturally proud of the way our fighting men are serving their country.
One fighting man was much in her thoughts, her second son, Prince Andrew, who served as a helicopter pilot.
We and our crew saw the ship hit.
and I saw my ship, Invincible, fire her missiles. Normally I would have said it was a very spectacular thing to see, but at the same time it was very frightening having seen it from where I was.
There was considerable suggestion that Prince Andrew shouldn't go because of his position in the royal family. The Queen overruled that. She said, no, he's a serving officer, he must go. He must take his term with all the rest.
The Queen celebrated the end of the war as a mother, welcoming Prince Andrew home down on the quayside. Mrs. Thatcher celebrated as the victorious war leader. She took the salute at the city's welcome to the task force.
We had both a head of state and a prime minister, both of whom were women. It was absolutely clear in most people's eyes which of those two women was the more dominant, and that was, of course, Thatcher.
Everybody expected that Mrs. Thatcher, because she was a natural conservative and was always a very strong monarchist, would simply be completely deferential to the Queen. It was always said she curtsied very, very low, and this was an object of mockery, a private mockery at the palace.
The Queen's real confrontation with Mrs. Thatcher was still to come.
With the world. The world.
Prince Charles and Princess Diana spent their honeymoon at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Not always alone.
How are you enjoying married life?
Highly recommend.
How do you like Balmoral as a place?
Lovely.
Have you cooked a breakfast yet?
I don't eat breakfast.
Diana was a magnet to the press.
Prince Charles thought this would be a 9-day wonder. He was quite happy, after 10 years of intense spotlight on himself, particularly over his quest for a bride, for that spotlight to divert onto somebody else, but only temporarily.
Breaking with tradition, they took their first child, William, with them on an official tour of Australia. Diana stole the show.
I saw when Di first came, she was the centre of the attention of the crowds. And after all, with due respect to Charles, I mean, she's a somewhat more attractive personality in an outward sense. She was young, new, vibrant and different. And I could sense that at times that created some sort of tension between them, but there was nothing she could do to help that.
Diana was a kind of wish fulfillment of the 1980s. The way she blossomed, the way she became what the press christened Dynasty Di, it was like part of the 80s. She became enmeshed with the decade in the most extraordinary way. So that really, in the end, you could hardly tell whether you were looking at a soap opera on television or whether you were seeing Princess Di in real life.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nancy and I are deeply honored to welcome the Prince and Princess of Wales to the White House and express also our great happiness that we have been able to have this affair with Princess Diane here on her first trip to the United States, that we should be able to share in that first trip.
She had done what she wanted. She had the children she wanted. Charles, on the other hand, I think was going into, I suppose, a midlife crisis. Charles was still in waiting. Charles had no proper role. Charles has never had a proper role.
The prince created his own job and sometimes created controversy as well. In 1984, he attacked a proposed extension to the National Gallery, outraging an audience of architects there to celebrate their achievements.
But what is proposed seems to me like a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much-loved and elegant friend.
We were blamed for housing ills, social ills, planning ills, highway ills. And then it gradually rose to a huge climax and left us numb, but still in the presence of royalty. Polite architects applauded. He touched a nerve in the British national consciousness, the environment, architecture and housing. And what a marvellous platform! And the platform had been provided by those he sought to criticise most.
Many, many ordinary people felt deeply relieved that someone had spoken up against the tyranny of modern architecture. The people who gave us the high-rise blocks and all that that brought with it. And it was part of a broad pattern, I think, of what Prince Charles was trying to do about the improvement of the quality of life and the improvement of the built environment.
The Prince had a long-standing passion for urban renewal. He funded inner-city projects through the Prince's Trust, created when he was in his 20s, and which later expanded into a network of charities.
I think when he first put up the idea of the Trust, his advisors and his courtiers were very disturbed. The people that were coming into contact with the Prince of Wales for the first time were probably a little bit left of centre. And I think that would be what worried the courtiers. And I think if he wasn't the Prince of Wales, he would certainly be left of centre.
So let's make 1987, if we possibly can, the start of a new renaissance for Britain. We have been led, I would suggest, by the noses for long enough down a path which totally ignores the principles of harmony and the well-calculated relationship of the parts to the whole.
The heir to the throne is not allowed to engage in politics. Speeches like this were seen by the Conservative government as critical of its policies. Mrs. Thatcher asked Prince Charles to keep quiet and chided him after she won her third election.
We have a marvellous party tonight, and you can clear up tomorrow, but on Monday, you know, we've got a big job to do in some of those inner cities.
On other issues, Mrs. Thatcher would face a more formidable challenge. Policy towards Britain's Commonwealth, the countries of her former empire, was of special interest to the Queen. She was regarded with great affection, and as head of the Commonwealth, she had some freedom of action denied her in domestic politics.
I always had the feeling that the Queen was sure about the Commonwealth. She didn't have ambivalences. It wasn't something on the side. It was very central in her reign.
Mrs. Thatcher, on the other hand, was pretty scornful of it all. CHOGM, C-H-O-G-M, is Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and it happens periodically. And she and Charles Pole had a translation of this acronym, which was compulsory handouts for greedy mendicants. And, of course, that was quite private, but that was the attitude.
I think it's fair to say that the Queen didn't have a great affection for Mrs. Thatcher. She had the odd expression about it, which I found rather fascinating. I think there was a sense in which she was not at ease with some of the attitudes and policies of Mrs. Thatcher. And she, I think, saw Mrs. Thatcher as being somewhat dangerous to the cohesiveness of the British structure.
At the 1985 Commonwealth Conference in Nassau, Mrs. Thatcher was in a minority of one.
Mrs. Thatcher was resisting terrific pressure, both from the world and from the Americans, and from the Foreign Office internally, to raise the level of sanctions against South Africa.
Well, do come in, Nick.
You know, one of the great difficulties for Her Majesty must be, under the conventions under which the monarchy operates in Britain, to be living alongside, at times, a head of government, pursuing policies with which one disagrees. Margaret Thatcher had basic instinctive beliefs which she thought were inviolate. It was her ideology, if you like.
There were two different actors. The Queen would have been absolutely unyielding in her positions. And I think Mrs. Thatcher would have said, leave the politics to me.
6 months later, the political opinions of Queen Elizabeth made front-page news for the first time. The Queen, it was said, found Mrs. Thatcher's policies divisive and damaging to the Commonwealth.
The full story of how that famous Sunday Times story came about has never really been told. What was actually going on at the time was, months before we published that story, was that a whispering campaign had begun, orchestrated by the palace. I don't claim by the Queen, I don't know, but certainly by the palace, to do down the Thatcher government.
It's pretty clear to any sort of detached observer that it was the result of a specific briefing from Michael Shea, who was the press officer at Buckingham Palace at the time.
No, absolutely nothing.
Some Conservatives are calling for resignations at the Palace. Have you anything to say about
I've read about it. No, I have honestly nothing to add.
Can you categorically say that that leak did not come from the Palace?
I really have nothing to add at all.
But he was not the sole source, though he was one of the very important ones, and at the time, he was one of the 4 most important people in the palace, and he was very close to the Queen too.
Was this briefing done at the behest of the sovereign, or was it not? It would be very peculiar if something had been done on that scale and as comprehensive as that, without, if not the instructions, at least the assent of the sovereign.
I have no idea. Thanks very much. I think there have been occasions where I've given background briefing information to individuals, which has then ended up on the front pages, and that is my fault for trusting people when I thought we were speaking off the record and in confidence. I believe that certain facts about, say, the Commonwealth or the coal strike or whatever were blown up out of all proportion and made into a package that suggested that there was rivalry when none existed.
The Battle of the Titans became the Battle of the Puppets in a popular television series.
Well, at least I don't strut around in ludicrous little hats.
Yes, but you'd love to, wouldn't you?
It was not a popular time for the Thatcher government, and it took 9 points off the Thatcher government in the opinion polls within a week.
It did have one interesting side effect, which was that Mrs. Thatcher was booed when she went to the Duchess of York's wedding by the crowd.
Bad news for Mrs. Thatcher was swept off the front pages by the wedding of the Queen's second son, Prince Andrew, now created the Duke of York. The bride was Sarah Ferguson, known as Fergie.
Like Diana, the product of a broken marriage. Unlike Diana, a girl with a past. She'd lived with a man. The royal family broke through another barrier by this not being a problem.
I, Sarah Margaret,
I, Sarah Margaret,
take thee, Andrew Albert Christian Edward,
take thee, Andrew Albert Christian.
Sarah Ferguson was a commoner, ill-prepared for the formalities of royal life. The only advice she got from the Queen, the story goes, is wave more slowly.
A girl who's never been in Buckingham Palace before, it's terrifying when you first go in, and it's all complicated ideas, getting up and sitting down, and how you write a letter, and how you reply to people, and how you answer people. All that has to be learned. People need guidance when they're in a place like that. Of course we all got guidance. If you go to Buckingham Palace, you want guidance. You don't want to just walk in and think you're going to behave normally, because you don't. It's not normal. Nothing's normal about it.
The new Duchess joined the younger generation of royals, eager to project a more up-to-date image. The Queen's youngest son, Prince Edward, quit the Marines and cast the young royals in a TV game show for charity.
And after 14 hours of sitting in the rain and the wind and on a miserable June day, we were invited to a marquee where Prince Edward deigned to speak to us.
And I know the captains have enjoyed themselves. I only hope that you've enjoyed yourselves. Have you? Well, thanks for sounding so bloody enthusiastic. What have you been doing in here all day? Have you been watching it? Yeah. What did you think of it? Thanks.
I thought it was great. And he flounced out like a ballerina with a hole in his tights. And we were not impressed by that behaviour at all. And it's one of those occasions where people like to attack the press. We were just really observers at the royal family self-destructing.
Royal Yacht Britannia, Royal Yacht Britannia. This is United States Coast Guard Auxiliary Vessel Mayer. We wish to welcome you to the port of Long Beach.
In 1988, the Duke and Duchess of York, Andrew and Fergie, went to Los Angeles.
This is Royal Yacht Britannia. Thank you very much. It is our pleasure to be here. Over.
A documentary scene in Britain opened with the Duke and Duchess on the move. The younger generation of royals were in tune with the times, perhaps ahead of the times, with the help of Hollywood special effects. But the Duchess was criticised for her ostentatious dress and for taking the common touch too far.
All these men around here.
Love you!
I'll see you later.
Fergie's problem was that she was unable to adapt her, let's say, natural joie de vivre and exuberance and high spirits into the decorum required of a member of the royal family, which translates into there are privileges here and there's a price you have to pay for them. That was something that she never understood.
Fergie's exuberance infected Diana, but embarrassed Prince Charles. For the younger royals trying to loosen up, an acceptable informality seemed hard to find.
People in Britain want the royal family to go and be cold in Scotland and get wet in Balmoral and traipse about in ill-fitting, uncomfortable clothes and have a generally miserable time. And then we don't mind that they're the royal family. You know, they can do the official functions and then go and be miserable and Scottish and Victorian, and that's fine. But when they start going to the Caribbean and going skiing and doing things that we want to do, then people get rather irritated.
As 1992 began, the Queen enjoyed her Victorian mansion at Sandringham. She could look forward to her 40th year on the throne, but 1992 would be the worst year of her reign. She would call it her annus horribilis. In the past, the Queen could be reproachful when the behaviour of her daughters-in-law seemed less than dignified. In 1992, giggling would be the least of her worries. The first shock came in January. In a fashionable London apartment, a window cleaner stole pictures of the Duchess of York and her children vacationing in Morocco with an American friend. Within weeks, Fergie separated from Prince Andrew. She said he was never around.
For the first 6 years of our married life together, he spent about 42 days with me every year. And therefore, the children didn't really see him that much anyway.
The press had published stolen love letters from Princess Anne to a palace aide, but the toughest of the young royals knew how to deal with the press.
Divorce?
Very much.
Never been mentioned by anybody.
Princess Anne was granted a divorce and quietly remarried in Scotland. In February, Charles and Diana went to India on a state visit. Charles had been before. In 1980, he visited the Taj Mahal and vowed to return with his wife. Now, Diana went to visit that great monument to love, alone. Alone except for the press, and for the press she had a point to make. The rumors her marriage was foundering, she seemed to say, were true. In May, she posed alone again at the pyramids. Prince Charles had gone on to Turkey. Diana had given photographers hints of her loneliness. A little-known journalist eagerly sought the story behind it.
Over the years, I've obviously built up contacts in the royal world. And on one occasion, I spoke to somebody and I said, look, tell me the truth about Diana's life. Let's get real here. Let's get to the bottom of this. And we arranged a meeting where this astonishing tale poured out about Diana, how she'd suffered from bulimia, how she'd made these various failed suicide attempts, how Charles had been consumed with a passion for Camilla Parker Bowles, which had, in Diana's eyes, been the cancer which had been at the heart of their marriage.
In June, the book was serialized in the Sunday Times, not the tabloids.
It had one major feature that no other royal book had ever had. The sources were named. And we went to the people who had been named and we said, you are quoted as saying this, did you say it? And if you have said it, will you stand by it? And to a person they did.
At first, public opinion was critical of the press for invading Diana's privacy. But the book appeared to have Diana's backing. She was using the media to make her case against Charles.
I think Princess Diana has all her life with the royal family been a gilded media manipulator.
Plainly, it was a turning point in royal reporting, and I don't think it does any good to go back over, raking through the ashes. But plainly, it was a very damaging, and it declared open season, I think, on the royal family.
The press abandoned all vestiges of deference. The royals were hunted down throughout the summer. In August, photographs of the Duchess of York consulting with her American financial advisor in France were splashed in the French press, and then spread across 10 pages of Britain's Daily Mirror.
Sorry, I have no further comments to make in addition to the comments and statements I made last night.
When the pictures were published, the Duchess was in Scotland with the Queen. She may have been banished. She certainly made a hasty exit.
I have met the Duchess of York, and I was very fond of her. I thought she was a splendid girl, but I think basically unsuited to the task of being a royal princess in any time, not any modern times.
5 days after the publication of the Duchess's escapade, the spotlight turned back to Princess Diana.
Well, these are the pictures we've got of Di looking very, very sad.
The Sun published a mysteriously recorded telephone conversation it had long possessed.
It's just so difficult, so complicated. It makes my life real torture, I've decided.
It appeared to be Princess Diana in conversation with a male admirer and revealed the depths of Diana's alienation.
I just felt really sad and full of empty. I thought, bloody hell, what have I done for this fucking family? What's really quite whatever the word is his grandmother always looking at me with a sort of strange look in her eyes, not hatred, sort of interest and pity, or mixed in one.
In early November, the Prince and Princess of Wales made a state visit to South Korea. Their body language said it all. They were only going through the motions. The marriage was over. The announcement came within weeks.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected. This decision has been reached amicably, and they will both continue to participate fully in the upbringing of their children.
My reaction was one of great sadness. Great sadness because I think it does great damage to the monarchy. I think that it undermines the respect which the people want to have in the monarchy. And somehow, therefore, they feel disappointed, and I think rightly disappointed.
By November the 20th, the eve of her 45th wedding anniversary, Queen Elizabeth could look back on 1992 as the year all her children's marriages had collapsed. A column in the Conservative Daily Telegraph had called for her resignation. Another in The Independent had imagined the monarchy scrapped for a republic. And the Australian Prime Minister had vowed to remove the Union Jack from the Australian flag and end her sovereignty. That night of November the 20th, her house burned down. Of her 8 royal residences, the Queen considers Windsor Castle home. Her grandfather, George V, had chosen Windsor as the family name. It was the symbol of a dynasty, seemingly unshakable. And now, like the Queen's family, it was in a shambles.
We thought when we first responded to this that it was a small fire that possibly could be put out quite quickly. It became evident very soon after that that it was not a small fire. And this is a great deal bigger than anybody expected.
Prince Andrew described his mother as devastated. She could only wait and hope firefighters would rescue her art treasures. The government quickly offered to cover the costs of rebuilding the castle, but this only subjected the Queen and her financial privileges to public attack.
Isn't there something brutally unfair about the fact that at least £60 million will be paid out by taxpayers to the richest woman in Britain to repair one of her homes without any contribution from herself, whilst only 400 yards away from another one of her homes at Buckingham Palace, there are people who are having to live in cardboard boxes and pensioners will die this winter to hypothermia? Isn't the truth of the matter that the Queen should pay the lot herself and not call upon impoverished taxpayers to have to foot the bill?
Yes. The argument the taxpayer should pay the bill rather lends support to the argument that the royal family should pay taxes just like everybody else.
Polls the next day showed 95% of the British people saying, why should we pay for a palace that we pay to maintain? She didn't take out her fire insurance. If my house burns down and I haven't taken out fire insurance, is the Queen going to pay for it? No way.
"1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis. I sometimes wonder how future generations will judge the events of this tumultuous year. I dare say that history will take a slightly more moderate view than that of some contemporary commentators. He who has never failed to reach perfection has a right to be the harshest critic. This sort of questioning can also act, and it should do so, as an effective engine for change.
For the Queen to speak of problems and of change was unprecedented. It was soon announced that she had volunteered to pay tax on her private income and to take some minor royals off the tax rolls. The monarchy was adapting in order to survive. But for some, it was not enough. The Labour Party's Tony Benn introduced a bill in Parliament for the abolition of the monarchy. It was never debated. But as 1992 ended, the monarchy was more shaken than at any time since the Queen's uncle Edward VIII had abdicated in 1936. As usual, the Queen enjoyed the Christmas holidays at Sandringham. This year, neither of her daughters-in-law was in evidence. The Duchess of York headed for the Alps, the Princess of Wales for the Caribbean. The Queen's annus horribilis was over, but the most serious threat to her throne was yet to come. The centre of the next scandal was her son, Prince Charles. The Prince of Wales had to endure a bruising reminder of his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, the publication of alleged recordings of their very intimate conversations.
I knew it would revive me. I can't bear a Sunday night without you.
Oh, God. Trouble is, I need you several times a week.
So do I. I need you all the week, all the time.
Many were disappointed with Charles, including a biographer who had been in his camp.
I was very, very disappointed when I saw the Camilla tapes. I thought he was better than that.
Some among the clergy doubted if he could now be crowned king.
If it were proved beyond doubt that he had gone into marriage in an adulterous relationship, had taken vows in church, which were solemn vows before God to be faithful to another woman, and had continued his unfaithfulness, then I believe it has to call into question the taking of oaths before God in church.
Feeling subtle pressure to leave the stage and consumed by the media, Diana bowed out in 1993.
When I started my public life 12 years ago, I understood the media might be interested in what I did, but I was not aware of how overwhelming that attention would become. When I've completed my diary of official engagements, I will be reducing the extent of the public life I've led so far.
Even if she got divorced, there's no way that Diana isn't interesting anymore, which is quite an extraordinary position to get yourself into. And in terms of a PR battle with Charles, then he's hopeless, completely washed up.
But Charles has not given up. He spends time with his sons and has invited the cameras to watch him for a television documentary of his own devising.
Charles right now is like a presidential candidate in New Hampshire. He's out there to get the votes for the primary election so he can then go on and be president. They have decreed, not publicly, but among themselves, that 1994 is to be the year of Charles.
No one knows if this promotion of Charles on the 25th anniversary of his investiture will work.
The sort of repackaging, it's sort of just our market show business, really, though.
that. It's very undignified, and it won't last. I think that a period of withdrawal and asceticism is probably the best way of recovering the mystique on which actually monarchy is based.
The Queen has retained her mystique by always being herself. She never plays to the gallery. She offers the comforts of continuity as she graciously performs the rituals of head of state.
May God bless her and all who sail in her.
Her family has fragmented, but she goes doggedly on.
It's difficult for her to understand somebody who doesn't have a sense of duty or a sense of what is required in a certain position. I mean, everybody thinks in a way, what fun to be the Queen if you can be the Queen for a day. But for a lifetime, to have that life, I think we're very, very lucky in the person who is our Queen at the moment.
I've known the Queen now since November 1949, and I remember meeting her in the drawing room at Clarence House, and I can remember exactly what she was dressed in, a wonderful blue dress. She was wearing Queen Mary's great sapphire diamonds. And I fell for her. Sorry. Anybody who loves monarchy and believes in it, as I do from the bottom of my heart, must, I think, be worried at what has been happening during the last months. Quite apart from anything else, I mean, simply for the sake of the monarchy, it is my firm view that the Queen should live forever.
There is a motto which has been borne by many of my ancestors, a noble motto, I serve. Through the inventions of science, I can make my solemn act of dedication with the whole empire listening. I should like to make that dedication now. It is very simple. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
It is almost 50 years since Queen Elizabeth, as a 21-year-old princess, dedicated herself to the service of her people. She has never faltered in her commitment to that pledge.